Before the creation of the heavens and the earth, there was the existence of the ocean, and also an island blessed by the goddess who governed it, with blue hair like the ocean, Saint Mark, to live up to the virtue of being a charming and pleasant figure in every way. Every night, in a place where luxury and ambition shine like stars with balls, dinners, and glasses of wine, people interacted with each other. But even in places like these, there was a place that retained all the filth and immorality. A scream shot out saying she was a rat. This happened in Kimura, a poor neighborhood, in a dark dead-end alley where men shouted that she shouldn't even think about continuing to run because they knew everything. One of them approached the boy named Abel, threatening him because they knew he wasn't really mute, catching him by surprise. The man grabbed the boy by the collar of his clothes, lifting him furiously. Abel retorted for them not to touch him, moving away from the man, but the others insisted on pressing him because it was true he wasn't mute, and also that he was a woman. They stared intensely at Abel in a frightening way, saying that looking closer, his face was repulsive despite his body being beautiful. Extending a hand towards her, and her golden eyes widened in fear as they tried to touch her, until she recoiled and launched an attack on the person who tried to touch her, and the man screamed in pain after being attacked. Abel attacked the man to the point of making him bleed with pieces of a broken bottle, threatening them if they approached her again. But soon one of the men approached anyway, pushing the girl hard against the wall to the point of making her lose her balance, threatening again because they had accepted her out of pity. After all, she was a pitiable orphan, but above all, she was ungrateful. Abel dropped her bottle on the ground when she was strangled, hearing that they pitied her because she cleaned shoes for a living, but she wasted the chance to change her life now. The man punched Abel in the face, making her grunt in pain when she was sent to the side, saying they would give her a week. If she didn't pay the debts for the protection services before next week, she would have to deal with a man and not a shoe. A few days later, in St. Selena Square, Abel continued her work cleaning the shoes of people sitting on benches, wondering what she should do as there were only 2 days left for her deadline to end, which worried her. She had to get the protection money somehow still. Her eyes focused on her work of caring for the shoes. And if they really dragged her back to a brothel like that before that could happen, she would rather die. But what interrupted her speaking was the man who was caring for the shoe. He lowered the newspaper he was reading after saying out loud that he wanted to die instead of taking this woman's hand, Lucrezia, before entering the ceremonial hall, which caught Abel's attention, who was listening to the man's conversation. But above all, she was surprised when she realized she recognized that man, being none other than Cesare Bonaparte, a handsome man with dark hair, the brightest star among the great nobles of Saint Mark and the protagonist of countless love stories was Cesare Bonaparte, who finally met his fiancée, the youngest daughter of the Della Valle family, a dark-haired girl named Lucrezia Della Valle. Based on a matrimonial agreement made between the two families in the past, this drew the attention of the aristocratic world by choosing Cesare, the only heir of Bonaparte. The aristocrats congratulated Lucrezia for conquering an unrequited love, but Cesare himself crumpled the newspaper he was reading with irritation and with sarcasm said it was really incredible because he knew exactly what kind of woman she was, sighing as he thought it was indeed destiny. Meanwhile, Abel watched Cesare still taking care of his shoes, realizing it was really him, and being surprised because she never thought she could meet such a famous man in St. Selena Square this way. And she wondered what she should do if she could tell them about her situation and thus ask for help. After all, they might feel empathy for her and give her some coins. Cesare lit a cigar and exhaled a smoke, mentioning that they should continue with that plan. Next to him, the other man with thinner hair asked if he was talking about that insane plan, as it seemed crazy, and Cesare asked back if there was another way to act. They should find a good girl and deliver her to Della Valle, which again caught Abel's attention, realizing that this was not a simple opportunity like some gold coins, but maybe it was the opportunity that God was giving her, once in a lifetime now. Suddenly, she asks to be sold, promising that she would become the most coveted lady of Saint Mark. This silences Cesare, who stares at the protagonist without understanding anything until the man next to him asks what this boy was talking about. Even Cesare mocks that a shoe cleaner could distinguish people's shoes, saying he wasn't an idiot, until Abel insists that he was mistaken, introducing herself as Abel, but her real name was Adele Vives, and so she wanted to say that she would do exactly what he wanted from a person better than all the others could. Cesare asks if she was sure of what she was saying and stares at her, while the protagonist justifies that he needed a fake marriage between Bonaparte and Della Valle, catching him off guard by knowing this information. Adele insists she just observed the situation and assumed this. In the marriage contract announced by the Della Valle family, the family surname appears, but it wasn't decided who would fulfill it. So he thought that if he bought a woman and pretended she was a hidden heir of Bonaparte, he could avoid the obligation of a political marriage. It had to be a woman because the Della Valle family still didn't have a married son. The man next to him is impressed that Adele deduced all this just by observing the situation, and Cesare tells Jude to forget it because it was a waste of time. That's because the Della Valle family had been a family of excellent academics for generations. It wasn't a place where a shoe cleaner who only knew how to read and write could fit in. After being silent for a moment, Adele asks what could happen if she could do more than just read and write. Cesare asks if she spoke more than one language, and she agrees because she even knew how to speak Algerian, an Arabic language spoken in Algeria. He inquires where she learned those foreign languages, and the protagonist explains that it was by reading books in the civil library or listening to conversations of foreigners, which catches Caesar's attention as he felt he was being played by the goddess of the sea. And he runs his hand through his hair in a way that makes Adele curious, until Caesar asks what he could do, because no matter how intelligent she is, she at least needed to be beautiful to be convincing. So the two men get up after mocking her more than once, with Caesar stating that she was eliminated even before the preliminaries, walking away from her, walking as they leave Adele still crouched on the ground. After a moment of silence, she asks them to wait a little, and her beret flies away when she removes her hairpins, surprising the two men as they turn towards Adele, who was surprised by the beauty of the dark green hair and golden eyes of the girl, and they hear her ask if she would still be eliminated from the preliminaries. When the two approach her again, Jude says he couldn't believe she would really pretend, and it made no sense. But thinking about it, Adele's hair was similar to his, as were her eyes, seeming perfect from Jude's point of view. Caesar asks if Adele was interested in him, and she denies it, until he asks what she knew about her parents, and she replies that she was an orphan. After reflecting on her answers, he admits he is curious, because he didn't believe that Adele was foolish enough not to know she would be killed if discovered, and asks why she came to him. Then, she slowly says that it was because she was hungry, keeping the man's eyes on her. After a moment of hesitation, Caesar turns and says it's okay anyway. Walking a few steps away, he looks back and introduces himself as Caesar, the one who would dispatch her. And Adele touches her own chest, saying that in the place where they both wished, they should meet again, which makes Caesar realize that she even knew the quote from Durante's play, making him smile, feeling that he had found a quite useful woman, and responds that he would be waiting for her in the state of the Bonaparte until sunset that day. Later, the rain started to fall in the city and around the houses, but Adele still couldn't believe what had happened. After all, Caesar Bonaparte accepted her proposal. Now, she wouldn't have to worry about being sold, but she thinks of a golden-haired girl she used to spend time with and thinks she couldn't tell Clarice, her only friend, about this. Although Adele wanted to discuss it, it seemed that Clarice was busy that day, but at least she decides to leave a letter for her friend. Suddenly, she hears knocks on the door and is surprised, wondering who it could be knocking at this hour, just looking at the door, when the knocks and noisy sounds continued to the point where Adele started sweating cold with nervousness. Although she couldn't believe it, a man forced the door of the house open and said he knew she would do this, looking at her threateningly, clenching his fists, because the protagonist not only didn't pay the protection fee, but was also trying to flee at this hour. He goes to her, furiously pulling her by the arm to teach her a lesson, but Adele resists, telling him to let go while trying to free herself from the man's hands. After hitting the man and being cursed by him, the protagonist begins to try to escape the place and from him. Even when the man runs towards her, reaching out to prevent her from fleeing through the window, Adele gets nervous, realizing she was almost about to be caught, and the tension in the place makes her see everything in slow motion, until she remembers Caesar's words reminding her she would be executed if caught, and she just jumps out the window, thinking that the truth was she didn't care at all about dying. As long as she could escape that horrible place where she used to live, even after jumping from such a high place to escape the man and falling face down on the ground. She gets up and starts running desperately through the streets under the rain. As long as she could get out of there, she was willing to give up her life. Later, the protagonist was greeted by the Bonaparte butler, Ernest, who said they were expecting her arrival. And so he asks her to enter the grand family mansion, luxurious even under the rain that night, because the master of the house was awaiting her presence. Thus, she makes her way to Caesar's office. He was sitting at his desk working by candlelight. As he comments that she was a mess, it was obvious, because Adele was completely soaked and injured after the previous escape. Then Caesar asks why his sister appeared there looking like a wet dog, smiling when he asks her to explain to her brother exactly what happened. After a moment of silence and hesitation, the protagonist mentions the existence of an old man named Nino who ran Kimura, a shoe shop. Since she didn't pay the protection fee, she was expelled, but in the end, he also intended to do more to her. But Caesar interrupts her, saying that old man was dead then, catching Adele by surprise with the sudden claim. Then he comments on how it was raining a lot that night. It rained so much that he heard the hill where Kimura was located collapsed. Unfortunately, due to this accident, during the collapse, a person died, which should be a common occurrence. After saying this, Caesar asks if there was anyone else bothering her, and she's still a little in shock, denies that there was no one else. The two stare at each other in silence for a few seconds until he says he would leave things as they were. Adele wonders what that was, as it was as if he always knew about Clarice's existence, which makes her clench her fists. But Caesar says there's no reason to worry, as she just had to ensure the plan would be executed in the best possible way. With that resolved, they could go straight to the main point, and the goal was exactly what Adele herself was thinking, because she should seduce Della Valle's son and marry him. Her body, her heart, Her speech and every part of her body, from the tip of her nose to her feet, everything would be done as a perfect Bonaparte should be. That way, Adele could deceive all the high society of Fornetti. Then he lights a match to light his cigar, stating that she had 3 months to train. But if she fails to be recognized as a lady by him after that period, the plan would be terminated. Then he throws the match away under Adele's watchful eyes. She reflects that if the plan ends, her life could also be lost along the way, but she agrees anyway. Caesar asks if she didn't intend to know the reason for the 3-month time limit, and she asks if it wasn't because of the birthday party, which slowly makes him agree because that was exactly it. As he thought, the protagonist was smart enough to figure out his plan just by reading a newspaper article. Deep down, it seemed she knew more about that family than Caesar himself. Then he approaches her and raises her face by lifting her chin, saying he believed there was another reason, and asks if perhaps she wasn't interested in him. Smiling at Adele. From his point of view, the only thing a country girl like Adele had was her pretty face. But he, as an older brother, should appear like a kind of savior. Therefore, he was sure this would make her want to cling to him, despite the protagonist's serious look. Caesar gives her a warning that he doesn't want her entering his room in the middle of the night, and moves closer to let the smoke touch her nose, until Adele thanks him for the warning. But she really wasn't interested at all, thinking that, although Caesar was handsome, he seemed like some kind of weird lunatic, which brings a smile to his face, leading to a laugh. After all, her expression was indeed interesting from his point of view. Finally, he steps away from the protagonist, explaining that he was just warning her because it had happened before, and Adele agrees to keep that in mind, calling him master. But Caesar turns around and tells her not to refer to him like that, but as an older brother. And the protagonist watches him sit on his sofa after slowly agreeing, calling him older brother as commanded. Then Caesar, also calling her younger sister, says that from now on she will become Adelaide Bonaparte. She was 5 years younger than him and used to live in Colo, which is across the ocean, believing she was just a commoner. Until suddenly, for some reason, she ended up getting there alone, which makes her realize that Caesar was creating the whole story of how she became part of the family. Then she asks if there is any possibility the president is part of this plan. Caesar's grandmother was the president of Signoria, Eva Bonaparte. Without her commission, this plan would have been impossible, and Caesar hesitantly denies it. That's because Eva wanted to see her great-grandchildren. But besides that, she was about to welcome Lucrezia with open arms, which makes Adele understand that Eva supported that marriage. He crosses his legs, asking if Adele isn't interested in other things, as there should be things she wants to know. And she asks about something important, until Caesar responds that his own parents were part of it. After all, if she intended to pretend to be his younger sister, she should know about it. But he was curious to know why Adele didn't ask about it, which makes her sweat cold. She wonders if there was anyone who didn't know about it. As Caesar's parents were so in love, they abandoned the family and their youngest son. Thus, the protagonist says she heard they moved to another place as soon as Caesar turned 7 years old, bringing a smile to his face again after taking a drag on his cigar, relieved not to have to explain this. And they could just say that they gave birth to Adele later because they were in love, which was enough. He gets up to open the office door, telling her there is a maid waiting for her outside and she should just follow her. Smiling, Caesar hoped that the next time they met, he could see her with the demeanor of a lady, excited to witness her transformation. Outside, Adele meets a brown-haired maid who greets her, introducing herself as Eponine Cour, guiding her to where her new room would be from then on, which surprises the protagonist with how elegant and beautiful it was. Eponine explains that the Bonaparte usually avoid luxurious things, so this room wasn't very extravagant, but she wouldn't have to face any inconvenience during her stay in that room. Even for Eponine, this room was too simple to be a lady's, which was the opposite from the protagonist's point of view. The maid says she could always talk comfortably with her, and Adele agrees, correcting herself to speak more informally. Then the maid turns around and explains that she would have etiquette classes starting the next day, so it would be problematic if she ended up catching a cold. Extending her hand to Adele, Eponine invites her to accompany her because she would help her bathe, and guides her inside that large and luxurious bathroom. The protagonist gets nervous and stammers that it's okay, because she could do it herself. But the maid insists that noble people shouldn't bathe alone. Rules of etiquette. Still, Adele nervously holds her own clothes to accept the maid's words, although Eponine asserts she wasn't making a request now. After that firmness in her words, Adele has no choice but to agree and ask for the maid's help. She begins to undress, and her wet clothes fall to the bathroom floor. But something catches the maid's attention, and it was the many marks and wounds all over the protagonist's body, which makes Adele quickly respond that everything could disappear in an instant, aware of it because she had been beaten too much in her life and they wouldn't leave scars. However, she cringes, asking if the maid intended to report what she saw to Caesar, and wonders if he would break the contract upon realizing her body was repulsive. After a long silence, Eponine mentions that the contract between Adele and Caesar was valid until her marriage to Delaval. It was fine if she was not discovered by Caesar and Delavalle until this day. sighing with exhaustion, making the protagonist herself feel relieved, still hugging her own stained body. Additionally, Eponine turns around, saying that even with those injuries, she was too skinny, so she should focus on recovering her body for now while placing rose petals in the bathwater, saying that many should have told her this before. But now Adele was part of the Bonaparte family, which makes the protagonist reflect in silence, staring at her reflection in the water. Meanwhile, Caesar in his office asks how his lovely younger sister was, and the maid reports that Adele did not seem very healthy. Besides, there were traces of violence all over her body, which makes him say that a pearl with scratches was not so valuable. However, Eponine insists that this would be easily cured if treated regularly, becoming a beautiful woman as she gained more weight. Still, even after thinking for a bit, Caesar comments that she was already quite pretty, recalling when he held her by the chin to analyze her features. But he was a little sad about her being his younger sister, which caught the maid's attention in reprimanding him, which brings a smile to his face, assuring that there was no reason to worry because he wouldn't do anything to Adele. After all, he intended to kill her as soon as the deal was over anyway. That night in the mansion, the protagonist ended up waking up during the early hours as usual and observed through the mansion window the time when ships began to depart in the distance, and those who went out during the night to fish returned to the port. Soon, some fishermen distribute some fish they couldn't sell, which makes the protagonist remember that she woke up every morning at that time for that reason. Still, looking around her room, she couldn't believe she was living such a luxurious life now, which makes her ask aloud if she could manage to do well in that whole plan, since she didn't think she could go back to sleep. Adele grabs a book that was nearby and sits back on her bed, starting to read until daylight breaks outside. At that moment, Ebony appears in the room to wake her up, asking her to get out of bed now, asking if Adele couldn't rest well during the night, and she denies it, saying she just woke up a little earlier. Putting the book aside, the protagonist asks what her duties were for that day, which makes the maid mention that she seemed anxious about it, revealing that from today on, she would always be busy and without breaks. First, they would start with breakfast, thus guiding the protagonist, already dressed and prepared for the day, to the table where various dishes were arranged. Ebony pulls out the chair for her to sit down, asking if there was any dish she would like to eat. While sitting down, Adele responds that she is fine with anything, even if it's spoiled, and the maid mentions that she shouldn't be picky, which was a good virtue. Table manners were one of the most essential skills a noble should possess, as it was said to be the fundamental basis of etiquette. One starts using the cutlery positioned to the side, and so she indicates to the protagonist with her hands. She should keep a straight posture and chin up, never rest her elbows on the table, and keep her hands low while eating. The maid watches Adele follow her indications, praising her performance, and says she could start eating now. Upon tasting the first bite, the protagonist's eyes light up and her face gains color from the flavor. Beef carpaccio with arugula and celery, linguine with mackerel and abalone, monkfish wrapped in potatoes with tomato sauce. They were dishes that provided a perfect combination, good enough for Adele to want to lick the plates. Then she worries that perhaps she had eaten too much to the point of seeming like a beggar. But Ebony just says that it was a pleasant sight to see her eating so well. For now, she thought it appropriate that she had about 4 meals a day, because as a lady, she should have a strong and healthy body, which seemed great to Adele. After the meals, the two walked through the mansion's corridors, as the maid intended to show her around the house. Thus, she shows the study room, the conference room, the gallery, the game room, the dining room, and much more. Finally, there's also the central area of the first floor where Caesar's office was located, and Ebony guides her to knock on the door whenever she visits, as it was part of the house rules. Walking outside at sunset, Adele asks if there was anything else she should be careful about, and Ebony agrees, realizing she should tell her about it right away, revealing that there were a total of 6 people, including the maid who knew about Adele and Caesar's plans. But in a few days, it would be 7 people, and a certain someone would teach the protagonist about the etiquette of being a lady, none other than Madame Flavia. Ebony says that Flavia could be strict, but she was the best in her field, so Adele should follow her instructions, and Adele agrees, asking how she should greet the madame when she meets her, which makes the maid remember that she should teach the forms of greeting as well. So she holds the fabric of her skirt, teaching her to keep her back straight and slightly bend her knees, finally bowing her head. When Adele replicates, the wind sways her hair and dress, which catches the maid's attention, surprising her with that sight, especially because she was excellent at learning. Later, Adele returns to her room and lies on the bed, with Ebony praising her for the day's lessons and praying that the sea goddess watches over her that night. Then the maid leaves the room, closing the door quietly. Leaving the protagonist alone, she leans on the bed and looks at the ceiling, thinking that everything was very quiet. And then she closes her eyes, remembering the noises she always heard in Kimura every day. It was not something she could hear in that house. It was such a pleasant silence that brought tears to her eyes, never imagining there was such a peaceful world. A world where it was normal to eat hot food and be able to sleep in peace. Suddenly, she hears voices shouting her name, telling Adele to run, and she opens her eyes just as Ebony quickly and abruptly opens the door to the room, desperately saying that they had a big problem happening in the mansion and she had to get up right now. That's because Madame Flavia showed up to visit the mansion suddenly. Running to the bed, Ebony quickly says they should hurry to fix her clothes first. Well, Adele could barely understand what was happening so early. Wiping her eyes, suddenly a loud noise at the door occurs, drawing their attention in that direction. When Flavia herself appears, a woman in elegant light clothes and a severe look who entered, a historic family that served the Bonaparte for generations were the Loudons. Among them, Flavia Loudon, who made her name in social circles, was quite well known. First, she was known for her beauty and elegance. Second, Flavia gained fame for her eccentric temperament and strict teaching methods with the girls. Entering Adele's room, she strikes her cane on the floor, shouting that Adele was in vulgar clothes. Despite her trying to apologize because she was in a hurry, Flavia shouts again, asking who told her to respond, which was absurd to even ask to teach something so vulgar and disrespectful. The shouts make the protagonist cower, wondering what she should say or how she should act. That's when Caesar appears at the door, saying that if she had good manners, he wouldn't have summoned her, but he didn't expect to see her so early and leans back, smiling at Madame Flavia. Seeing him, the woman marches furiously towards him, shouting that she wanted to explain, but Caesar leans close to Flavia's face, making her complain about being in public. Still, he asks if she slept well the previous night, and when she grumbles that she did, he smiles because he would like her to have lunch with him, although he doesn't know if she would have time for that. And Flavia nervously responds that any invitation from him is always welcome. Caesar's smile makes her a little tense, and they stare at each other in silence for a moment, until she slaps her own forehead, commenting that he was serious, upset, because he always managed to seduce with his great looks. Finally, Caesar turns his gaze towards the protagonist, who was still covering herself, and asks if Adele was preparing to wash herself. Apparently, he should have come later, which irritated Flavia for saying such careless things. And if that girl heard and got the wrong ideas, it would be a big problem, making her look away and think that if Flavia knew the true story, she would think differently. Still, Caesar doesn't care because it was quite damaging to his pride, which makes Flavia shout, asking for his forgiveness, and asks how Adele could act like that when she was just a humble being, until her eyes catch something, making her approach the protagonist, who remained perfectly still in place, pulling her clothes to reveal her shoulders and neckline. Surprising her, Flavia, with a look of disgust, asks what those dirty wounds were, and covering herself, Adele responds that it was nothing as they would heal quickly and there would be no scars, without any interruption in the plans. But the old woman shouts that Adele wasn't good enough, not even imagining what hole she came from, possibly being beaten by drunks after selling her body. Even among the lower classes, it was too much for Flavia's standards. They have no courage and are just a bunch of lazy people. Even if 100 years pass, she would never be qualified enough to be part of high society, much less become a noble lady. Adele watches Flavia shouting all the time, and as the old woman says, it was clear she intended to use her body to climb the social ladder. This makes the protagonist recall how Nino said the same, despising her, just like many other men throughout her life and work, beating her. After a long silence, she apologizes to Flavia, clutching her clothes, because despite having many flaws, she was still trying her best, which makes Flavia turn around, still shouting, questioning if she could hide her origins through mere efforts and if she really believed she could deceive those who were born and raised in high society, calling Adele arrogant just because she lived her whole life humbly. Then she responds that she never had parents to teach her anything, so such a thing was impossible. Still, her brother must have thought it was possible, and that's why he brought her there, which surprises Flavia a little. Adele says that if Flavia thought it was a problem, if she thought that situation was so absurd, she should discuss it directly with Caesar. These responses from the protagonist bring a smile to Caesar, who just watches the scene in the room in silence. Proceeding, the protagonist states that she has been rude because she was indeed ignorant and therefore asks for forgiveness from the lady before her. In response, she tightens her grip on the cane in her hands, trembling a little. Her nervousness and frustration in response to this make her face turn all red, gritting her teeth, until finally Flavia turns her face and adjusts her hat to cover her eyes, suddenly mentioning with a trembling voice that she had an appointment that day and ended up forgetting, so she would be leaving first, and bids farewell to Caesar. Thus, she passes by him, who is still smiling, out of the room and away from everyone, still covering her expression. Seeing all this, Caesar looks at the protagonist and comments with the same smile that his sister was indeed special, which brings a thank you from her, despite still sweating cold. Despite Adele's hesitation, Caesar continues to praise her for being quite understanding, almost mocking, because now Flavia should be feeling unwell after those words, and would be less exhausted if she were more obedient. After all, the madame was kinder than she seemed, which made Adele a little tense, noticing his more forced smile. Then the protagonist asks if he meant that she should pretend to feel sorry for Flavia. The term pretend catches Caesar's attention, who approaches Adele, mentioning that it was she who was pitiful for living like this all her life, stopping in front of her, saying that if everything was just a game, there should be nothing wrong with it. Therefore, Adele should know what the smartest choice to make was. And so Caesar says as he leans close to her, Observing this approach and hearing those things makes her realize it was a challenge. Finally, Adele cringes while apologizing, thinking it was a challenge and a mockery to test her reaction again, and continues to say that she would try to meet his expectations for his younger sister, despite knowing that Caesar turned it into a great source of amusement. In response, he remains silent with a serious expression, then turns away from the protagonist, still in silence, commenting that rumors said Flavia always got bored quickly. The next day, Adele went out with her maid, Eponine, through the corridors, asking if she would take her again to learn how to stand up. When they arrive to open the doors of a room, the maid responds that there is no reason to worry. In the hall they enter, there were several shining silver statues, as well as Flavia, who was standing there waiting. And Eponine says that whatever Caesar decides will happen. Noticing the people who entered the hall, Flavia crosses her arms and lets out a heavy sigh, saying that the surname Bonaparte was not a name someone like her should have. So even the great blue star is on her chest. Adele listens to her words in silence about how even the sea goddess would be angry about this. Flavia insists that although the Duke asked to make her a worthy lady, she believed there was still a different lesson to be done before that. Thus, she orders Adele to kneel, confusing her with what she just heard. The lady points in her direction, saying that she should have heard her words very well and orders her to kneel again. The protagonist wonders why she was being treated so disgustingly, whether it was because she was a shoe cleaner or because she did not come from a noble family. If it was because they wanted to hurt her, since if that was her big goal, she chose the wrong way to act. After all, a shoe shiner's knees have no value at all. So Adele kneels as ordered, catching the lady by surprise. She approaches, warning her to listen carefully, and steps on the protagonist's thigh with her heel, pushing her shoe against her dress. She says that Adele was merchandise and all she had to do was be silently sold to the Delaval family. If she wanted more than that, she would become shark food. That's why Flavia was putting her in her place, something Adele had no choice but to agree with. Finally, the madame removes her foot from the protagonist and orders her to stand up again as they would start the lessons. First, they would go over walking posture, and soon Eponine approaches carrying something in her arms. It was a shoebox, which Flavia explains would be responsible for correcting her crooked walk. Adele was taken by surprise by the delicate black heels, still hearing that she should always wear those heels when walking, even outside of her lessons. Despite the orders, the protagonist was enchanted with her new shoes and gently touches them with her fingers before finally taking them out of the box to put them on her feet. But to her surprise, the heels were not the right size, and she tries to comment on this to the madame, but the woman, with a dark smile, orders her to stand up anyway and start walking right now. She points to a corner where Adele should do her walking training and go to the end of the corridor, ordering her to do this until she tells her to stop walking, even though the protagonist's toes and heels are squeezed in the shoes. Obviously, Adele's walk was not easy at all, and she soon fell face first to the ground with a scream. Her fury made her take off the shoes and throw them away, complaining that she couldn't take it anymore. But Flavia says that this was not the correct behavior during a sacred lesson, and it was obvious that the protagonist had no desire to learn, shouting that being so, Adele was not worthy of becoming a Bonaparte and orders her to leave immediately. The madame was smiling the whole time with that dark expression, shouting just to scare that girl she saw as disgusting. But to her frustration, the protagonist got up again and went back to her walking training over and over again despite this. Even wearing extremely small shoes for her feet, Adele walked for hours without stopping. At a certain point, she looked at the madame and asked if she should keep walking, with no expression of pain on her face. Flavia thought that being poor, it was expected that her actions would be inelegant, but she was too frustrated with that. Then, the madam tells Eponine to leave for a moment, to which the maid bows while apologizing, explaining that Caesar ordered her never to leave Adele alone. But the madame insists she discussed this with the Duke beforehand, and certainly wouldn't punish her for it, so she asks in the name of Lauriton for her to leave the room, until, despite hesitating, she finally agrees and leaves. When they were left alone, Flavia begins to refer to the protagonist as a shoe shiner, telling her to sincerely leave that mansion, still staring at her with that angry expression. Adele responds that it was not the will of the one who brought her there, but the madame insists she was saying it now, because compared to the other Bonapartes, it might be that the Delaval family was not the best option, but it was better than a despicable and inelegant person like her. That's why the madame suggested she put herself in her place and leave. Adele's safety was guaranteed by Lauriton, and she would also receive a good dowry for it, but the protagonist's expression didn't change at all. When she asks if she was saying that because she wanted her brother to marry Lucretia, which catches the lady off guard, the protagonist says that Flavia must think she came there to follow her brother's orders, but that was not the case. So she apologizes to the madame, but she must inform her brother what she just heard. This makes Flavia shout that this was the will of the Duke's parents, as well as Adele's parents by consequence. The promise between Delaval and Bonaparte was much older than she thought, so she asks if, because of this promise, Caesar might consider marriage. Many women desired him, but still he continues with childish attitudes without settling down with anyone else. For Flavia, it was unacceptable that this noble family does not continue. Now, she could understand that Adele ended up involved in a great dispute, which makes the protagonist bow in thanks. But she unfortunately couldn't follow her orders, and she says this with an indifferent expression. This again caught the madam off guard with her determination and stubbornness, making her shout that Adele was audacious, for she clearly only wanted more money. But the protagonist denies it, responding that she only liked the food here, and says this recalling each of the dishes, desserts, and all kinds of things she could savor in that house. This left the madame even more confused by what she just heard. So Adele explains that money or a future was an exaggerated luxury for her. For them, who struggled daily, such a promise of a future was nothing but a utopia, worth less than food for them from the lower class. Flavia shouts that the reason Adele stayed, it was only hunger, which was certainly the action of a snake, a point that the protagonist agrees with without hesitation. After all, she had been living her whole life that way, unable to sleep due to great hunger and surviving an entire month on just a piece of hard bread, living without knowing what tomorrow would bring, worried about the next meal she might or might not have. Therefore, Adele had no more to think about, so she apologizes to the madam again, bowing. But no matter what order she gives her, she did not intend to leave the Bonaparte family. Later that night, Flavia found herself walking through the corridors illuminated by the night with the same tense expression, thinking it was a great disaster. It was uncomfortable, but Adele still had an interesting charm, even wearing those shoes. It was clearly absurd, but it still made her wonder why she could imagine Adele and Caesar together. She was so confused that her hand fell on her forehead, realizing she needed to find another solution as quickly as possible. Thus, a week passed since Madame Flavia's enduring lesson. It was a period that passed so quickly that the protagonist barely noticed the days going by. But during that time, she learned a few things: tone of voice, etiquette, social tips, how to talk to superiors, how to decline a gentleman's invitation. But above all, during her walk through the beautiful garden, how to walk properly, even though her feet were still sore from keeping those heels on during the lessons. When Adele felt pain in her feet and stopped walking in the garden, Eponine asks if her feet were okay, and the protagonist agrees, although the maid knew it was a lie. She couldn't do much for her lady now, but mentions that in fact, Flavia knew from the beginning that Adele's steps were always perfect. The speed of her learning and improvement was surprising, and it was obvious even the madame noticed it. The protagonist was able to absorb information easily like a sponge, even when Flavia explained things only once. Although constant training is essential, the maid believes that no one would consider the protagonist to be of lower class. After hearing these words, Adele slowly turns her face and says she understands, but doesn't comment further. It was then that, during the walk, something caught her attention in the distance, which was a group of ladies conversing. The protagonist asks who they were as she thought it was the first time she saw them, and Ebony explains that they were part of the Orkanina delegation. Adele looks at the maid as she tells her that they had been in the mansion for some time, but the protagonist didn't know because she was busy with training. But a few days ago, the second prince of Orkanina ascended to the throne, all with the support and help of Lord Caesar. It took a lot of effort because he was a prince without a stable base. But in the end, he was able to achieve his goal. So the Emperor of Orkanina sent a gift there in exchange for the help he received. That's why the mansion had been a bit noisy recently, full of ladies making visits. Adele notes that by influencing the throne of the neighboring nation, her brother's position would become even greater. Suddenly, the three ladies conversing in the distance notice and shout for Caesar when they see him standing nearby and run to him. The Duke smiles and greets the ladies, commenting that it was a beautiful morning as Ebony and Adele just observed the scene. The favoritism of fate and the goddess, the prodigal son of Bonaparte, were all characteristics of Caesar, who received the blessings of the sea goddess. But he doesn't deserve them, for from Adele's point of view, it didn't seem that the Duke valued them that much. In fact, Caesar always seemed empty inside, although that might not make any sense. Ebony mentions that they should leave before someone notices them, and the protagonist agrees. As the two walk away from the conversation, even the Duke noticed their presence and watched them disappear into the distance. One of the ladies notices that Caesar was looking the other way and asks what happened, to which he replies that he thought he saw a mermaid also catching the lady's attention in the direction where the Duke was looking. However, he covers the woman's eyes with his hand, smiling as he says that despite this, there was still a mermaid right there. When he leans in, the lady says he is being very naughty, and her face blushes with Caesar's teasing. The Duke leans in to whisper in her ear, asking if she would come again at night, as he would be waiting for her. While blushing, the young woman says that if the Duke promises to take her seriously, she would visit at night, though he remains silent. Thinking that the lady is thinking nonsensical things, it seems time to bring her back to reality before sending her away. After all, she was mixing her feelings there when they should be just casual encounters, which makes the Duke touch her golden hair, thinking she was more exciting before. But now, thinking of Adele's greenish-blue hair, it no longer seemed so appealing to his eyes. So, to her smile, the Duke says she was really very cute, and continues by saying it was about her presumption, suddenly breaking the girl's smile. Finally, he turns to the other side, leaving the girl frustrated beside him in silence. With tears in her eyes, she says after a moment that she would be leaving, and the Duke wishes her a good journey, still smiling. Thus, he walks away from those ladies, ignoring the tears of the girl he left behind, thinking it was a big nuisance, and the others try to console her. Caesar lights a cigar during his walk, thinking that Adele should have taken that path now, and tries to follow her previous steps. Suddenly, he hears someone shouting to let go, which catches his attention to a scene happening there in the garden between two people, where an angry-looking man was holding Adele's arm, who was resisting after falling into the water. A few minutes before the Duke witnessed the scene, the protagonist and her maid had left the previous environment and walked near the fountain. Adele's feet were still red with all the injuries, but the pain was so much that she found herself falling to the ground and sending her umbrella flying, worrying Ebony. The maid runs to her, apologizing and asking permission to check her feet right away. Then, she takes Adele's shoes and notices her feet were full of wounds with blood and ugly blisters. Immediately concerned, Ebony alerts that this would no longer work, so she shouldn't push herself so hard. Still, the protagonist asks if she didn't have any anesthetic, as she would be fine if she endured a little more. Seeing her get up, the maid just looks up, clearly worried about her lady. After a moment of silence, she says they should end the lesson for the day now, and gets up from the ground saying she would fetch a wheelchair. But for now, Adele should rest her feet because she would be back soon. So, Adele sat with her feet in the water of the fountain, resting while looking at her reflection. She realizes that soaking her feet in the water helped relieve the pain with a cool temperature. Though it was a bit difficult, it was nothing compared to her days in Kinmora. Suddenly, her attention was stolen by a loud laugh coming from behind her. Passing nearby were three young men talking about the heart of a mermaid, which catches Adele's attention as she recognizes them as nobles. She worries because they were approaching and realizes she should hide quickly somewhere. As she gets up, the voices talk about not having seen Lucrezia anywhere, as they thought she would appear as the Duke's partner. Another replies that the Duke of Della Valle had been confined to his quarters, though he was expected to come out soon. It doesn't take long for the three men conversing to reach the fountain, walking around while the protagonist hid from them. After a while, she wonders if they had left, so she moves to try to peek, just when one of the men appears behind her, catching her by surprise as he opens a dark smile upon seeing what he found there. Then, he grabs Adele by the wrist and shouts that he found a woman hiding in the fountain, pulling her. The force of the pull makes the protagonist fall hard into the fountain, getting completely wet. Another man approaches and reprimands Henry for crossing the line, but Henry says he didn't push the girl as she fell on her own. Adele tries to get up with her wet clothes and looks in the direction of the men, which immediately makes them notice the type of woman they have found, bringing smiles to their faces. Henry comments that he just caught a mermaid instead of a person, and leans in to ask her identity as she didn't seem like a lady or a noble since she didn't even have shoes. But her dress was too good for a maid. When Adele remains silent, Henry insists by threatening her, as saying nothing would get her punished. Finally, he approaches to pull her by the arm again, asking if she was acting like that on purpose to get punished. The other man asks Henry to stop because this was Bonaparte territory, until he shouts back, asking if he should be careful just because of that while trying to punish a maid. Finally, Adele says that if he pulls too hard, her arm will come off, and she looks at him seriously, saying that his grip was hurting her arm and wrist with that aggression. The men are surprised because she was speaking like a noble, but the protagonist tells Henry to let her go, or he would regret it. That's when they all start laughing at her words, questioning who she thought she was, and comment on her rough hands probably belonging to someone of a lower class, suggesting that maybe she sold her body on the streets and snuck into the house. But now she had several clients to satisfy her work, and Adele gets tense with the atmosphere. She screams for them to let her go, but Henry keeps pulling and cursing. After all, she shouldn't even be treated like a human by a bastard like Caesar, and they didn't even know what she should be expecting by crawling into that mansion. But they start ordering her to go to bed with them, pulling her by the arm, until suddenly the Duke himself appears in the distance behind them, tapping his foot to get the men's attention, and they all turn towards Caesar, who seemed completely calm even in that situation. Despite recognizing him and saying his name, Caesar gives a sarcastic smile, saying they should have called him a bastard as they did before. He stares at Henri Petch, who starts to sweat cold after being recognized too, and approaches, commenting that the Duke Petch will certainly be delighted to know what was happening there since he came to the Bonaparte mansion with his old body just to ask for some money to borrow, and gives that fake smile again. Caesar stares threateningly at Petch, mentioning that Modine Petch accompanied him to feel more comfortable asking for help, which caught Henri off guard. He wanted to lash out at the Duke after he insinuated that his mother hit on Caesar, but the other men hold him back before he does, asking Caesar to calm down too as his words were going too far. But the Duke places his hand on the man's shoulder, saying that they were the ones who crossed the line by treating his younger sister as someone who would sell her body. That's when Henry finally goes into shock, looking over his shoulder at Adele, realizing she was actually related to the Duke. He looks again at Caesar, trying to understand the situation, and he mentions that her name was Adelaide. Then he releases Henry to step into the fountain to cover the protagonist's wet body with his coat and asks her what was happening for things to end up like this, which surprises her a little. She averts her gaze in the direction of the nobles, noticing that they all seem tense and sweating cold with nervousness. After a long silence, the protagonist asks how her brother arrived there, until Henry shouts that it was a big lie as the entire territory knew he had no sister. The Duke turns and agrees that until then she wasn't there, but now he had brought her to his home. After all, his parents are still in good shape, but he certainly didn't need to explain such a thing to the nobles, which makes them nervous again. Henry, exasperated, insists that it wasn't entirely their fault. After all, it was impossible to know that Adele was a noble lady walking that way with her bare feet covered in injuries. The Duke and the protagonist look at the blisters on her skin, still under the water. Finally, Adele apologizes because she was practicing so as not to be ashamed of the Bonaparte name, but hurt her feet in the process. She says she was having difficulty walking, so she asked for some medicine but didn't know something like this could happen. Despite the tension from the nobleman, the Duke lifts the protagonist in his arms, reminding her that he warned her not to push herself too hard. After all, there's no reason to gain reputation that way. Her health was much more important than that. Still, Adele responds that if she becomes a subject of ridicule in a social circle, the Bonaparte reputation would be ruined. To her surprise, the Duke leans in to kiss her forehead, saying there was no reason to worry. After all, they were a family. The term family was something Adele had never heard in her entire life, not even as a bad joke. She wonders if nobles usually did this with their families and what should be the right way to react to this affectionate treatment. Then, after a moment of hesitation, the protagonist touches the Duke's face, thanking her brother. He smiles in response to her gratitude, still holding her in his arms. Meanwhile, the nobles whisper if she really was his sister, which shouldn't be surprising since they looked quite similar. Finally, Caesar looks at the men and asks them if they really wanted to have fun with Adele, threatening them directly in a way that makes them step back, laughing with the excuse that it was just a big joke, and others try to say they were just trying to stop Henry's jokes. When they justify not knowing that Adele was his sister, Caesar asks if it was okay to act as they did if she wasn't his sister. Tense, they step back, making excuses that it was just a big mistake on their part, asking for forgiveness, until the Duke responds that he should also apologize to them as he planned to pursue them without worrying about which family they belonged to. Later, Caesar continued walking, carrying the protagonist with her injured feet in his arms. The two remain in complete silence despite Adele's gloved hand holding the borrowed coat to cover herself. This catches the Duke's attention, who asks if she was feeling uncomfortable and asks her to be patient as they were almost at the mansion. But little did they know that several ladies were watching the scene from a distance behind some trees. It doesn't take long for the two to arrive and enter the residence again, just when the Duke looks at Adele, asking if he should really do something like that, and she slowly apologizes, turning away as she was about to leave. She gets down from his arms and steps on the floor, but the pain makes her groan, collapsing to the ground again, still under the Duke's gaze. With a sigh, he notes that she seemed to be doing many different things. Asking where Eppin was, the protagonist responds that since she couldn't walk, the maid left to get a wheelchair. However, that wasn't the answer the Duke was looking for, as he didn't intend to spend money on a cripple who couldn't even stand on her own. The protagonist apologizes again, as she didn't expect to meet him in these conditions, until she is surprised by the sharp pain caused by Caesar's own foot stepping on hers. Asking if by any chance Adele had some kind of fetish for being stepped on by others like that, if it was a habit she acquired on the streets as long as they were men looking at her in that pathetic state. After all, otherwise, why try to do something they weren't even aware of in Bonaparte territory? Adele, with her fist trembling, asks if he was implying that she provoked all this on her own, which makes the Duke ask back if she knew that, to which she denies the allegation. After a moment, he laughs, catching the protagonist completely by surprise, until he says that Flavia has been acting maliciously, still with his foot on Adele's, asking if she couldn't do anything right, whether it was fighting and knocking them down or flattering to get favors. There should be various ways to do it. Under that gaze, the Duke says she was good at setting her pride aside and begging, but asks why he should waste money on someone who did nothing right. The protagonist covers her mouth to stifle her groans of pain, not responding. Then she says it's her fault, repeating it several times still on the ground, and curls up. Finally, Caesar turns and agrees, glad that at least Adele was aware of this fact. After removing his foot from hers, he orders her to treat her wounds before they start to rot. At that moment, the maid appeared running, calling for the Duke. But before she could speak, Caesar states he will listen to her when she has something better to say to him, announcing that the lessons would be canceled for 3 days, and leaves the hall, leaving them behind. While the maid tended to Adele, who was on the ground, the Duke returned to his office desk. Smoking his cigar, he analyzes Henry's profile, the second son who couldn't continue his bloodline, Trash that couldn't be independent, wondering if that's what was happening in the Bonaparte garden, and smiles to himself as he never knew what they were talking about. He gets up from his chair, thinking he should clean himself up. The plan went wrong as Adelaide was exposed, making it impossible to have another woman as a wife. Now, whatever happens, he had to ensure Adele's permanence as a Bonaparte. For the Duke, it was certainly exciting, especially thinking about her green hair that shone like aquatic plants, her pale skin like the sun, her unnecessarily large bust, still knowing that the noble bastard should remember what happened. However, Caesar himself was confused, as he ended up feeling excited the moment he held Adele in his arms. With a smile, he realizes that if this is what he was feeling, then it was all over for him when Cesar della Valle met her. Suddenly, amidst his thoughts, he hears a knock on the door and tells the person to come in. Madame Flavia appears, greeting the Duke slowly. The two look at each other from that distance in silence under the sunset light, as Caesar turns from the balcony to the Madame, finally starting to speak, saying he doesn't mind educating the poor, but he doesn't want to spend too much on it. She falls silent before apologizing, nervous about the pace of the conversation. However, the Duke firms his voice, ordering her never to bother him again, pressing Flavia, saying that she was a wise woman, so he assumed she would understand what he meant by that, and she leaves the room. With an enraged expression, the Madame thinks that the shoe shiner must have used some unpleasant trick to overload her own feet on purpose. Now all the effort she put into learning about the Bonapartes was totally in vain, cursing the protagonist again. Meanwhile, a group of ladies discusses the rumors of Lord Caesar having a mistress. Although the woman was barefoot and he shouldn't like women without class, they discussed that maybe the Duke's taste has changed, which was a possibility, but it didn't seem like a normal relationship given that Caesar was being too friendly, which was big news. After all, the Lord never let women into his residence, and they discuss animatedly under the sunset until the red-haired woman stands up abruptly, shouting who she was, then saying she wasn't feeling well, so she would go home now and leaves them, who bid farewell to Lady Genevieve. Genevieve runs away from the other ladies, who suspect she wasn't really feeling unwell when she seemed perfectly normal. She holds her dress while running, thinking it was a big problem, but she should inform Lucrezia about it right away. The woman runs to write a letter by candlelight, recounting the autumn in Fornetti, and that now she should be almost done with her self-reflection. But to her surprise, she couldn't tell Lucrezia that there was good news, as a dark cloud hangs over her future. According to what she heard from the ladies who gathered at Bonaparte to see the heart of the mermaid, even today, Caesar was seen entering the house with a woman in his arms. She questions how many more times he would need to break her heart before being satisfied, and what kind of indecent lady would try to seduce Caesar. However, Genevieve wished to meet Lucrezia as soon as possible to provide her some comfort in her sadness. Thus, she shouts to deliver that letter to Della Valle right away, finishing with Genevieve's signature. Meanwhile, after reading the letter, the dark-haired girl throws the letter into the fireplace with a tired sigh, and wonders what the Duke was trying to do by testing her limits again in that way, sadly staring at the fire. Thus, the rumors that Caesar was hiding a woman inside the mansion spread, and all the ladies talked about it. 3 days ago, when the heart of the mermaid brought Aquanina revealed, some people witnessed how careful he was in carrying that supposed woman. The day Henri Pech got into trouble for messing with the Duke's woman spread with various rumors. After all, Bonaparte took back all the money they had lent to the Pech family. However, everyone wondered who the girl was who was so well treated by Cesare, the woman who made the Duke fall in love. Meanwhile, the lessons with Flavia continued, but she could no longer bear seeing her family's name tarnished, wanting to get rid of the shoe shiner as soon as possible. Suddenly, the Madame decides to open the doors of the room where the protagonist was shouting her name, and she turns to greet her, catching Flavia by surprise. Because in just 3 days, she had become exuberantly beautiful. Her cheeks, once so thin, were more plump, and all the scars on her body seemed to have disappeared. She looked too much like a legend that sailors are drawn to. But the Madame's thoughts break when she realizes she is distracted, and she shouts that she heard about what happened, about how Adele appeared in front of the nobles with a wet body and bare feet, giving her a lecture that she should have stayed inside the mansion but instead wandered off like a lost dog, and things like that happened. She yells at Adele, should have trained her posture, not walked to the point of injuring her feet in a ridiculous manner. The protagonist lowers her head and apologizes, but the Madame tells her to be more sincere. Until the maid approaches, apologizing for interrupting the conversation, but she wanted to mention something. After a moment of hesitation, the Madame allows her to speak, and Epone thanks her before saying that she didn't know etiquette as well as Flavia, but she believed that the current posture of the protagonist was ideal to be considered a beautiful figure. All of this should have been due to her excellent teaching methods, so she suggests they proceed to the next lesson. Flavia grits her teeth, thinking that Adele was too skilled to have gained Epone's favor with her charm, but even worse was knowing that the Duke was watching them. With no options, the Madame agrees with Epone's suggestion, but the lessons were not over yet. Therefore, she had to find a way to expel Adele as soon as possible, still with her hands trembling with anger. Time passes until sunset that day, As the madame walked through the corridors of the house, she notices that Adele was so focused that it irritated her. In the end, she memorizes everything and has a great perception, very different from the ladies who resort to tantrums whenever they make a mistake. Frustrated, the madame thinks that if she had shown even a little laziness, she could have used that as an excuse. That was when, amidst her thoughts, she was interrupted by the voice of a black-haired girl calling her name. Turning around, the madam recognizes Lucrezia della Valle, who greets her elegantly, as expected of Flavia. As a lady, everyone idolized. Lucrezia smiles gracefully, mentioning that the madame seemed to be in good health, to which the lady asks the reason for her appearing at the Bonaparte mansion, and she responds that she heard that everyone in society was visiting, and she decided to do the same. Seeing how busy they were, it seemed like a big banquet was being held for Orquanina, and the madam agrees that was the case. The Duke had a deep connection with Orquanina, and now they even helped the new emperor ascend to the throne. Until Lucrezia touches her face, asking how Cesare has been these days, as she hadn't seen him for a while due to the self-reflection order. But there shouldn't be anything else happening now, which makes the madame notice that she heard the rumors, certainly being worried about all this. As it would be revealed anyway, Flavia believed it would be better to mention that she was actually just the Duke's younger sister. So the madame begins to say that the girl was the Duke's sister, but hesitates when something catches her attention, making her fall silent, staring at Lucrezia, who is confused by the sudden silence. And she asks if she had asked something too sensitive to answer, and she reflects that, thinking better. The person who would expel and pursue the protagonist didn't need to be herself. Smiling darkly as she realizes this, she stares at Lucrezia. The madam had previously received a warning from Cesare, so she didn't know what could happen if this repeated. However, what would happen if the person intervening was Lucrezia herself? Even though she might be an elegant and impeccable young lady, if she were as naive as she seemed, she would never have been able to monopolize the position of Cesare's betrothed. Thus, Flavia asks her to listen carefully to what she's about to say, revealing that the woman in the rumors was a direct blood relative of Bonaparte. And Lucrezia sighs, realizing that Caterina and Rohan had another daughter, relieved because she understood everything wrong. But the madame corrects her, saying it was not a misunderstanding, which catches her by surprise. That's because Adelaide was a member of Bonaparte and Cesare's younger sister, but that was what they were telling the public. As in reality, she could even be any random street dweller, so they could question the truth with Rowan and Caterina, which makes the think that if Lucrezia was as smart as she seemed, she would understand what she was saying. After thinking for a bit, Lucrezia thanks her for sharing her insights, giving a darker smile. After all, she always provided a guide on where to go. On another day during her meal, Eponine suggested that the protagonist take a walk as it was a noble activity, and the Duke certainly wouldn't forbid it. The guests were planning to take a walk in the Garden of Lorne, so it would be better to head to the water garden. After that day, Adele noticed that her maid began to always carefully plan the guests' schedules. She tells her that in the water garden, there was a large installed fountain. It was very beautiful, and she would certainly be surprised to see it. Adele thinks she was being kinder to her, but it was certainly out of sympathy, so she thanks the maid while drinking her tea. Later, during the walk in the beautiful garden, the protagonist realizes that Eponine was absolutely right, as it was a great place. Thanks to the humid air, her heart felt calmer, and Adele could only look at her surroundings in admiration. However, she hears a voice noticing someone was there. Turning around, the protagonist sees a dark-haired young woman approaching with her maid. It was none other than Lucrezia herself who greets her with a smile, and Adele is surprised to recognize her after Eponine's whispered alert. After all, she didn't even expect to see her so soon, and her nervous fingers fidget with the fabric of her dress. Deep down, she wasn't at all prepared for this encounter, but she forces herself to greet Lucrezia back. After receiving an intense look from the young woman, she smiles in return, commenting that she never saw her at the balls, and Adele reveals that she hasn't officially entered society yet. Then the young woman introduces herself as Lucrezia from the Del Valle family, and asks which family the protagonist belonged to. After taking a deep breath for a moment, Adele introduces herself as Adelaide Bonaparte, which makes Lucrezia feign surprise and ask if it was a new joke circulating in society. Embarrassed to say that her isolation ended not long ago, but the protagonist insists that it was exactly what she heard a little while ago. She was from the Bonaparte family, and due to various circumstances, was raised separately from her brother, Caesar. That's when the lady's tone of voice turned darker, asking if she lived in the same house as the Duke inside the palace, and Adele agrees, until Lucrezia interrupts her, smiling darkly, saying that since she became a Bonaparte, she has been thinking of leaving Fornetti and exploring Saint-Na. The protagonist gets confused, not understanding what exactly she was thinking, but responds that she wanted to stay close to her family, not yielding despite the pressure of the stairs, which makes the two of them stare deeply at each other, creating a dark and heavy atmosphere in the air. Adele feels that beautiful people are indeed impressively difficult to read, maybe because she was a true lady or because she was too tense. That's when she hears her murmur that it was another obstacle, catching her off guard with a threatening tone, raising her gaze again in Lucrezia's direction. She was smiling in that angelic way, saying it was great to meet her with that fragile little smile, but she wished that heaven and the angels would protect her from assassins, which leaves her a bit shocked by the tension. The impression that fell on her shoulders like a bucket of cold water was that Lucrezia knew something, and seeing her turn to leave as if nothing had happened, the protagonist can only watch. At this, Eponine mentions that they should inform the Duke about this. The conversation, and especially the greeting, were bothering her. Lucrezia couldn't directly oppose Caesar's intentions, but Adele felt cold sweat while reflecting on the matter, hearing that, as they say, submerged stones are more terrifying than the waves in front of you. Time passes, and it is evening when Lucrezia begins her journey back home. In her carriage, she wonders what she should do, covering her face with her hands to the concern of her maid. The lady, with tears in her eyes, murmurs that it seemed Lord Caesar was in love with a servant again, which shocks Hazel, the maid, as that woman they saw was the Duke's younger sister. But Lucrezia quickly denies this claim. Her mannerisms were not those of a young lady. To call someone like that a sister only made Lucrezia regret liking the Duke. Her voice trembles as she says that if that woman didn't seduce Caesar, then he must be planning to marry her. Still crying in the carriage, Hazel says that if this is true, she shouldn't be crying like this, as they should act before Adele steals the Duke. Otherwise, she will become a Delaval. The maid says they should get rid of that girl, to which Lucrezia asks how they would do that, hearing that they should fight. Still pretending to be a good girl, she denies this as she didn't want to hurt others, and now she was scared of what would come in the future, which worries the maid, who raises her voice, shouting that there was no need to worry as she would help her lady who was so fragile and sweet. Lucrezia smiles at Hazel, surprised, and leans in to hold her hand, asking if she would really do that for her, which obviously makes the maid agree, gently smiling that no matter the cost, she would help. Thus, the lady hugs her maid with tears in her eyes, thanking her and happy to have her by her side, promising never to forget her true loyalty, smiling darkly behind the poor, manipulated maid. Time passes, and the mansion where the protagonist is begins to fill with busy servants, making everything noisy in preparation for the banquet. Walking through the hallways, she heads to a door and knocks on it, remembering that she was told not to knock on Caesar's office door just a little later. However, she opens the door anyway, and his assistant informs the Duke that a new guest has arrived. Looking to the side, he smiles at Adele and asks how her feet are, still focused on his work and writing on some papers. She replies that she is almost healed and thanks him for his concern, but he mocks the fact that she thought he was worried about her, and Adele states that she was just being polite. That keeps a smile on the Duke's face, who asks what she was doing there, making her fall silent after a moment, until Adele finally asks if she could attend the event that would be held that day, leaving both men surprised. Cecil responds that it would be quite difficult and asks if she was there just for that, to which Adele says she would like to go to the event that would be held in the capital. With another laugh, the Duke is pleased because he didn't know his younger sister had a cute side. It seemed he was getting used to it now. After a moment, the assistant beside him continues to look closely at Cecil until he finally gives in, because now that she was there, he could introduce them to each other. Then the Duke introduces his younger sister, Adelaide Bonaparte, who greets the man beside him, introduced as Gigi Manfredi, Cecile's assistant, who also worked with the standalone trade operated by the Bonaparte. And he quickly begins to shower Adele with compliments because she looked like a sea siren among them. With a sigh, Cecil says that his family was growing, and Gigi becomes quite excited about this, because the Duke was indeed very lucky. While they were talking, the assistant soon gives him a warning, because the Duke should have looked at the document very carefully. As time passed, Adele thinks she was enduring it, but ever since she met Cecil, it felt like a piece of her mind was being cut layer by layer with a delicate knife. Even though she had decided to forget that day, the shoes that stepped on her feet and the words that previously pierced her heart. A little later, Cecil asks if the protagonist met Lucrezia because he also heard that she received an interesting warning. Hesitating, Adele agrees that she believed she had received a warning, and the Duke agrees that it was probably the case. Originally, Eponine was more familiar with social environments rather than cleaning shoes on the street corner, which was fascinating, making Cecil wonder where they learned that. And just so she would know, he would have a branchier accompany Adele after the banquet was over. After the protagonist agrees, the Duke orders her to leave because he needed to continue working. With that, she bows and leaves the room, to which Gigi says that if the branchier arrives after 2 days, it should mean that there would be no one to protect her while she attends Lucrezia's banquet, which worries him if she could be fine during that time. After a moment, Cecil responds that he didn't think anything could happen inside the Bonaparte mansion. Instead, he should be preparing in the kitchen with something quite old, which makes the assistant agree after hesitating for a moment. Now, again, Gigi felt he should be working on something that didn't seem quite right, which made him break out in a cold sweat. Much later, as expected, Flavia Lorden attended the banquet. She had been called by Duke Cecil again recently. People at the banquet wonder if by any chance they were trying to bring her back to the central social again. It was better to build a connection with her in advance. Flavia thinks that the family had fallen behind for a while, and she smiles because as long as the Bonaparte family was on their side, everything would be fine. until a voice approaches to greet Flavia and asks if she was enjoying herself, coming from none other than Lucrezia. The two approach and talk, smiling, with Lucrezia commenting that the decoration was indeed beautiful, and the Duke had good taste for it. That's why Lucrezia wanted to ask Flavia if it was okay to talk about the existence that should be removed from the Bonaparte family. Stammering, Flavia looks away, responding that she had nothing more to say on the matter, suggesting she handle it on her own now. At this, the lady questions if it would be better to have that conversation with Cecil himself. It seems she had no choice but to tell how Adelaide's secret was revealed. That left Flavia terrified, sweating coldly as she said she only did it for her as a favor. And Lucrezia smiles because she was just being smart. Duke Cecil should be showing trust in her now, but it was Flavia herself who told one of his secrets. That is why she made it clear now that she was not trying to confront her, because they were facing the same enemy. Therefore, she was just asking for a small favor from Flavia, saying that their business would only be conducted with extreme caution and success. With that dark smile of Lucrezia, Flavia stares at her, frowning and biting her lips before finally asking what it was that she wanted. As time passes, the ball continues and several couples dance to the music in the hall. Meanwhile, in her room, Eponine comments that the ball had already started while she prepares the protagonist's hair. Adele asks if her maid did not intend to go, and she says she was not a noble, so she was not required to attend. Adele herself was unsure if she would go to the ball, but Eponine insists that she was so beautiful that she was sure all eyes would be on her when she attended. To the protagonist, showing her weakness would only strengthen those who wanted to hurt and exploit her. After a moment of silence, the maid says that getting ready for the ball was sometimes more fun than the event itself. A dress worn by a lady of the Bonaparte should never be worn again by another person or by herself. Be it hats or parasols, gloves and dresses, necklaces and earrings, stockings and shoes, all should always be new. That is why the maid believed that Adele always passed through Bella Stella Street, which caught her attention. Remembering that she had never been on Bella Stella Street even when she lived in Kimura, it wasn't as if she was forbidden to enter. But it was always so bright and wonderful that it seemed like a place she shouldn't be. The shop names were like lines from a romantic poem. Adele agrees that it was indeed beautiful to Eponine, until they hear knocks on the door and the maid finds it strange because there shouldn't be visitors now. She approaches the door and when she opens it, she finds Flavia giving her greetings with a somber look. She tells Eponine that she urgently needs to talk to her about an important matter. The elder would like to receive another report from Cecil and needs records. The maid replies that she was attending to Adele at the moment, and so should wait a little. Then she turns to tell the protagonist that she would have to leave for a few minutes, and the protagonist agrees. Hesitating, Ebony hears Flavia insist that they were waiting for her, and that they should go at once. And so the two women go outside the room, closing the doors while Flavia gives a last look back. Alone, Adele could feel the sound of the music from the ball flowing, and she spends her time reading a little. Her curiosity to visit Bella Stella Street was making her so anxious that she could not even read calmly. Suddenly, she hears knocks on the door again, making her wonder who it could be, because she didn't think Ebony would return so soon. The thought makes her break out in a cold sweat of nervousness, especially because the knocks continue, and she has a feeling she shouldn't open the door. It was a voice that took her by surprise, and she wonders where it came from, because there was no one else in this room besides her. It seemed like it was just her mind playing tricks on her, until finally her room door opens by itself and a maid appears, apologizing for intruding because it was an urgent matter, and therefore needed to talk to her now. Adele is surprised because it seemed like a young maid had suddenly appeared there. But anyway, she asks what happened, and the maid replies that Caesar was calling for her, and the protagonist hesitates, remaining seated on the sofa because something seemed very wrong. That maid looked too young to be a Bonaparte servant, and those clothes didn't seem to fit her. But if Caesar was really demanding her presence, it was a disturbing situation, so she gets up and decides to leave. Thus, the two go out, but Adele is confused because the maid was running up the stairs, saying that Caesar was on the balcony. For some reason, Adele didn't want to go with that strange maid. But anyway, Caesar was never the type to explain himself to others. The maid says they were almost there, and finally opens a door at the top of the stairs, and Adele goes ahead, walking, until, with an apology, the maid pushes her from behind, catching her by surprise when she is pushed from the roof, falling toward the garden. Meanwhile, at the banquet, the guests toast to the Duke and shower him with compliments, because he was indeed very incredible. It was not enough to be the youngest person to become a member of parliament, but he also helped the emperor ascend to the throne. Considering that the emperor was Duke Caesar's cousin, it would be a great diplomatic advantage, and the Duke's decisions in parliament would also be strengthened. He was handsome, had a good family, excellent charm for business, and even for political dealings. He didn't lack in any of these aspects. Everyone wondered who could marry this perfect man. Could he really marry Lucrezia della Valle? A little later, Caesar excused himself and went out to the balcony to sit down and smoke a cigar. He felt much more at ease now. But when he looked up at the ceiling, he noticed the initials CA, making him realize that something must be happening on the roof. Raising his gaze, he sees that the initials were about Caterina Bonaparte and Rohan Bonaparte, who, on a festive day like this, decided to dance. They placed her in the most beautiful chair in the hall, gave her a biscuit, and for long hours he could only see the two of them in their own world. That memory of Caesar was like an untouchable world that no one could approach. It was strange that it all happened in a place like this. Suddenly, Jude appears, shouting for Caesar because the young ladies were eager to see him. So he asks what he was doing there. He was caught off guard and barely recognized him dressed like that, making him question if he had gone mad. And as Jude touched his own hair to show off, the Duke gets irritated and tells him to leave right away. But he says he was pondering something while wandering around, and mentions the saying that the commandment was a lamp, the law a light, and the rebukes of correction were the way of life, a reference to a biblical proverb, making it clear to the Duke that Jude had chosen the clothes, and even questioned if he was poor. Anyway, Jude asks if, after getting rid of Lucrezia, he couldn't fall in love with another lady. And he even shows the shawl that fell on him by coincidence, to the point that it seemed like fate. To which Caesar asks back if he thought he wouldn't marry out of fear of Lucrezia. Then Caesar notices that the initials of Caterina Bonaparte were written on the shawl. The things his mother used were being passed down to Adele. This makes him wonder why the shawl fell on Jude, and he wonders where it came from. Meanwhile, Adele was pushed off the roof by the maid who apologized. But before she could fall, she held on in time, realizing that she could now remember that this woman was none other than Lucrezia's maid, Hazel. And the protagonist asks if it was Lucrezia who sent her to do this, which made Hazel freeze, not knowing what to answer. Adele orders the maid to grab her quickly, because otherwise the responsibility would fall on her mistress, making Hazel stammer in fear, because Lucrezia would be disappointed. The protagonist shouts, calling her an idiot, because obviously Lucrezia wouldn't allow her to stay alive after doing something like this, shocking the maid as she hears her say that Lucrezia would take her life to erase all existing evidence, so she should grab her hand quickly. But Hazel shouts back in denial, because her lady would never do that. And furious, she steps on Adele's fingers, screaming for her to die already as she tries to make the protagonist let go of the edge of the roof by stepping on her fingers. It didn't take long for Adele's fingers to give in, and she falls from the roof, plunging into the garden. The youngest member of parliament, the patriarch of the Bonaparte family, the man who received the greatest love from fate and God, Caesar Bonaparte, when he was lying on the stone ground looking at the stars, it was the first time in his life that a girl fell from the sky directly into his arms like that. At that, he asks if she was okay, because at least she didn't seem hurt, until he notices that Adele was cold, sweating, and trembling, making Caesar smile, mentioning that if she wouldn't let him touch her in the same way, she should take her hands off his chest and get off him. Quickly, she moves away from the Duke, who thinks he had no intention of going to bed with Adele, but she looks in the direction of the roof, saying that a girl wearing a Bonaparte maid uniform pushed her off the roof. She had followed her because she said she had been called by Caesar, and he also looks up in the direction of the maid fleeing, frowning when he hears it was Lucrezia's maid. A little later, Jude appeared on the roof, shouting to the Duke that he couldn't catch the criminal because they were too fast. But since Jude couldn't hear anything from that height, Caesar just looks at the protagonist and asks if she had entered his room in just her nightgown. Then Adele quickly covers herself, explaining that her shawl flew away, and the Duke laughs because removing it wouldn't literally change anything about her appearance. He asks if she would do anything he asked if he said it was urgent, making her blush and remain silent, not knowing what to do because she didn't know what Caesar was thinking. Until finally, the Duke takes off his own coat and places it on her shoulders. She thanks him, taken by surprise, and that's when he feels a pain in his back that makes him groan. Adele notices that he was injured, making him wonder if she was really worried about him now. Sighing, he asks if she doesn't remember when he stepped on her injured foot. Then, Caesar crouches down, asking what she would do if he were injured, perhaps even take care of him in his room. But before Adele can respond, Jude comes running and shouting for the Duke, asking if the two of them were okay. Finally, the Duke decides to return to his room, where he was treated by the doctor for his injury near his ribs. The doctor says that luckily the internal injuries don't seem severe, but physical exercise is prohibited for some time. Moreover, while recovering, he should stop smoking, which makes the Duke laugh while puffing on his cigar. The doctor explains that starting the next day, he should take steam baths, so someone should be sent to help him. Caesar agrees as long as they just send the medicines, which leaves the doctor surprised, but agreeing nonetheless a little later. Meanwhile, Adele thinks that since Caesar often does this kind of thing, there wasn't much choice but to follow the maid, even though she found it suspicious. Suddenly, Eponine appears, running and shouting, worried because Adele wasn't in her room, and the Duke takes the opportunity to demand an explanation. After a long and tense silence, the maid bows, apologizing because it was her fault, after being a little surprised by receiving a call that the Duke had requested another report. But since it was Flavia's words, she came to believe it, and Caesar says there was no reason to doubt it. That's when Gigi appears, saying that as ordered, he sent the knights to arrest Flavia Lorden and also detain anyone who tries to leave. At this, he asks if Gallic was involved as well, and the assistant agrees that it was indeed the case. After exhaling the smoke from his cigar, the Duke says they would send him to Flavia, but for now, they should bring Lucrezia immediately. Sometime later, knocks are heard at the door, and it's Gigi returning, which confuses Adele because suddenly he decided to knock when he had barged in earlier, which confuses her because it was made clear that it was forbidden to knock when entering Caesar's room. But the Duke smiles, commenting that he was coming, and walks to the door, making Adele understand why she was called to his office. The knock on the door meant danger and was a signal for them to prepare when opening the door. So Caesar sits down, asking the protagonist to accompany him. Wrapping herself a little more with his coat, she sits beside the Duke as Lucrezia is brought into the room. The door is open to welcome her, smiling at Duke Caesar, and he also smiles at her in greeting, putting his arm around Adele, which makes her eyes widen in shock at the scene before her eyes, stuttering as she stares at Adele's state beside him. Caesar orders her to sit down and not stand by the door, to which she nervously agrees, approaching them. She is accompanied by a maid, which surprises the protagonist because it seemed like she had already replaced her old maid with another wearing glasses. After Lucrezia sits down, Caesar asks if that has always been her maid, and she stammers that yes, because she had served her for a long time. But the Duke quickly denies that this was true, although Lucrezia insists that she was always her maid and even looks at her knees. As expected by Caesar, it was evident that Lucrezia had thought of everything and acted quickly. She would be a perfect candidate to be his business partner if there wasn't such pressure. So great to marry, which draws a nervous laugh from her, thanking him while sweating coldly, and the Duke continues to press her to know if she was really proud of that, which makes Adele think that from her expression, Lucrezia even forgot that she tried to take her life. It must be because she only had the head to think about Caesar, which was not normal at all. At that, Lucrezia asks if he was injured upon noticing his bandages, and he diverts his gaze to the protagonist. Smiling at her and approaching, he responds that he just needed to save a mermaid that was falling, then kisses Adele's forehead, infuriating Lucrezia as the two talked, and the Duke worried about the protagonist because he preferred to get hurt rather than see her injured. Lost in dark thoughts, Lucrezia stammers that maybe she could take care of those injuries, and Caesar says it wasn't her fault, so there was no reason to worry. Furthermore, Adele was taking care of him, so it was all fine. And the hand on her shoulder made Lucrezia even more furious, stammering that having a beautiful girl taking care of him, being alone in a room, maybe people would start to interpret things. This drew an amused laugh from the Duke because that was his little sister, and it would certainly be a great waste to marry her to his brother. After a long and intense silence, the Duke states that he would let this pass this time, but there wouldn't be a second chance, making Lucrezia cry. The more he threatened her that if she did something again, the families would be forced to meet again, but for a very bad reason. Meanwhile, Flavia was locked in a room, pacing in circles, furious and nervous because Lucrezia had left her to her fate. When the doors opened, Flavia froze upon realizing that a person had entered the room slowly. She stepped back, realizing who it was, a man with brown hair and blue eyes who removed his hood, announcing that in the name of the Bonaparte family, she must follow him now. A little later, the young man and Flavia, blindfolded, were in a carriage headed somewhere, and she begged them to listen to her. Though she questioned them, they did not answer, and she demanded to see Caesar because she wanted to talk and explain what had really happened. As the brown-haired man remained silent, Flavia began to agonize inside the carriage, wondering where they were taking her. In the darkness, she could hear the sounds of birds and the horses' hooves, along with the sound of water that made her tremble, and wonder if she was dreaming because they were near the port. As they continued sometime later, the man removed Flavia's blindfold so she could see a person standing there, saying they had been waiting for her. The woman screamed that they should take her to the Duke because it was all a misunderstanding, and she would explain everything that happened. After all, she had no choice. This made the man, Gichi, smile, mentioning that she was supposedly threatened, but she was the one who revealed the young woman's identity in question. After all, she broke the most important rule for a vassal, exposing what should have been protected at all costs, breaking omerta. Omerta was a rule of silence, a vow of obedience in which individuals commit to never reveal to the world what they have witnessed. This was a bond formed between the nobility's members. Anyone who violated this rule should be properly punished. Flavia pleads that she did nothing. She only gave a hint. And Gichi laughs, guessing she must have given a very detailed hint. But that had nothing to do with him because they were just following the process. So he points to the docked ship beside them, one built in the year 840. The provisions aboard included flour, hard bread, sugar, biscuits, and many others. There were also hygiene and personal use products like candles and soap. Therefore, with all these supplies, Flavia could go alone to Zurich, which left her shocked because this was a place farther from Santner. Taking a trip alone in an old ship like this, even a small wave could be enough to capsize it. Gichi explains that if she can return safe and sound, Caesar would take her back because it was the sea goddess's will, and he would forgive her. The blessings wouldn't reach a ship that doesn't even have a statue of the goddess on its prow, making Flavia dizzy because all that awaited her was a real death. Anyway, Gichi tells Egger, the man holding her, that the explanation is over and now they could proceed. Crying, Flavia continues to beg, asking for just one more opportunity, just this time to speak with the Duke. But ignoring her, Aeger pushes her against the ship and Gichi waves, wishing her a good journey, advising her to be careful of the sea goddess's tricks. Despite this, she shouts that she did all this just for the sake of the ball. She did all this for the good of the Bonaparte family. But her words reach no one and she sails away on the ship. Meanwhile, Adele was in her bath with Eponine, who commented that she was very lucky because there were indeed no injuries on her body. The protagonist asks if the maid who pushed her was found, making Eponine fall silent before saying she was found in a nearby sewer. It was difficult to identify her at first due to the face that was smashed, and she had the same hair color that Adele had mentioned before. They took off her clothes, maybe with the intention of destroying the evidence. She had several wounds caused by a sharp weapon in the same places where Adele was injured. This made the protagonist shrink in the bath, realizing this was how things had ended. Then Adele asks what happened to Lucrezia, and Eponine responds that since there was no evidence, they couldn't impose any punishment, making her ask if it necessarily had to be an official punishment, and Eponine agrees that it didn't. But people were all paying attention because of what happened. The commoners liked Lucrezia, and she was recognized as a beautiful lady in social circles. She was also a scholar and lent her skills to many families. If something happened to her, the public would be greatly affected. Eponine mentions that she was aware Adele was sad and upset, and the protagonist responds that she understands the situation. Then the maid mentions that there was also good news because from that day on, they wouldn't have classes for a while. The Duke had ordered a review of the content they were teaching so she could rest for some time. Then Adele asks what happened to Flavia, and again, Eponine falls silent before changing the subject. She mentions that the Duke was looking for a new etiquette teacher, and the plan would be postponed because he was busy with work, resuming the lessons when he returned to Orkanina. The protagonist falls silent and thinks for a moment, realizing they had apparently dealt with Flavia as well. Then Eponine asks if she would like to put on her outfit to go out because apparently she will be taking care of Caesar. This catches Adele completely by surprise, not understanding what she meant by taking care of her brother. And shortly after, there she was in Caesar's room, smiling as he saw that his sister had indeed arrived, carrying his medicine in her hands. She approaches slowly and widens her eyes as she sees the Duke sitting, noticing his broad shoulders and a waist that curved beautifully. Various scars scattered across his muscles added a dangerous narrative. And above the waistline of his trousers, a small mole on the left side of his lower back. Caesar smiles and teases her because it took quite some time to admire him, again making Adele surprised and wonder if he had gone mad. She stammers and the Duke smiles, saying he was aware he was dazzling, but she didn't need to be so stunned to see something magnificent like that. This makes the protagonist shout that none of this was going to happen, and he ignores her as he lies on his stomach, saying she had to help with his treatment. Looking away, Adele asks why he trusted his treatment to her who had no experience, and the Duke responds that Gichi would make too much noise and Eponine would only annoy him. Besides, he was hurt because of her and she should take responsibility. After being silent for a moment, Adele comments that she would start by cutting the bandages and approaches with the scissors to begin the work. While taking care of the bandages, she wipes her own sweat, wondering why she feels so nervous, like she was trapped in a room with a predator. She continues, saying she would apply the medicine, noticing that the bruise was larger than expected. Touching his back with the medicine up to the side of his chest, Cesare feels the path her fingers take on his skin, until Adele says she couldn't reach the part of the bruise on the front of his chest and asks him to tilt his body a bit, but he refuses, even though she asks him to do just a little, so she asks if she could get on the bed for a moment. This makes him smile and agree, so Adele thanks him and asks for permission, climbing on his back to try to reach the other side of the wound. Suddenly, the Duke says she shouldn't play games with him and pushes her onto the bed, knocking over the medicine and holding her wrists. On the day Adele fell from the roof, no one asked how she was. Even so, while everyone else paid attention to someone else, she never showed signs of resentment, only looking at the Duke with sincere concern, which made him think there must be a reason for her being so presumptuous. If it weren't for him, she would certainly have lost her life, and who would care about that? This always bothered him and made him wonder why. The reason why Adele responded to his supposed call dressed like that, pretending to be more concerned for him than herself. Also, the fact that he gave in to his protective instincts and covered her small shoulders with his coat, all of this he only understood the next day. Otherwise, Adele wouldn't have cared for the man who stepped on her feet sometime earlier. And although the protagonist calls him brother, he orders her to call him Cesare, not liking it when she called him that while they were in bed. She insists that she didn't know why he was doing this, making him laugh as he tells her to stop with that game. After all, he was a man and she was a woman. When he looked at her, he found her charming, and being foolish also made her beautiful. That's why he would treat her in the best way possible, and ask her to simply pretend she doesn't know what's happening now. Many women had passed through Cesare's life, to the point where he had grown tired of all of them. There were many of them, countless, and for that reason it wasn't necessary for his sister to become like that. But in the end, that's what happened. And there they were, With Cesare believing he had made a good choice by accepting Adele, he decided he would pretend to take the firstborn son of Bonaparte. It was certain that there would be a strange life ahead. That's why Cesare says she could stop lying now, leaning closer as he said he would do whatever she wanted, and orders her to open her mouth. For a moment, he wonders what would happen next, but the Duke decides he would deal with it later. He would focus on what was in front of him. It was too magnificent for Cesare to waste his time thinking about anything else now. Until, to the Duke's complete shock, Adele raised the scissors against his neck, keeping him at bay with a look of disgust, which made him laugh, thinking she was crazy. But it amused him even more as he looked at the protagonist. He asks why she was holding that, perhaps intending to cut his throat, and Adele replies that she would if necessary. He questions if it was really necessary, to which Adele insists if he knew who she was. And soon the Duke realizes she was serious. Still smiling, he pushes her wrist holding the scissors onto the bed, pinning her hands above her head. It seemed too easy to disarm her using just physical strength. It was foolish to him. While Adele accuses him of being a pervert, Cesare felt he was going insane. He couldn't believe she was so presumptuous to this point, and he didn't remember enduring such a situation until he finally pulls away from her, asking if she hated him. After a moment of silence, Adele denies it, but neither does she like him, which makes his smile tense. Laughing as he realizes they shouldn't be there, he gets off of her and asks for a moment because he had to do something, sitting with his back to Adele on the floor. He wonders what he should do now because he no longer intended to give Adele to the Della Valle family. Sometime later at the parliament meeting, a man mentions that a few days ago he heard that all the envoys to Orcanina had returned and were grateful for the hospitality. With that, the man thanks Cesare, who smiles in response because it was just part of his duty to do so. However, the man says he had heard that he called Lucrezia to his office during the last banquet and hoped to hear good news. The Duke falls silent at this, replying that it wasn't for the reason he was thinking, but rather that he just had something to tell her. He insists on knowing what it was about, and Cesare reveals that it was about his younger sister, whom their parents had after abandoning the family. This shocked everyone at the meeting table upon discovering that there was a younger sister now, and the Duke smiles because it seemed there were many questions to be asked. But the identity of his sister would be revealed at a debutante banquet that would take place in a few months, after which he assumed he could meet the son of Della Valle. Around him, the men ask what this meant until he makes it clear that he intended to marry his sister into the Della Valle family. He couldn't monopolize his sister, who was so young and full of energy, catching Luca Della Valle by surprise. Cesare stares at Luca, who should be the head of the family, so Lucrezia wouldn't have to marry the prodigal son of Bonaparte. They could only negotiate that way. Meanwhile, on another day, Gigi rushed in very cheerfully to see the protagonist, praising her for being as graceful as always, seeming even more beautiful every time he saw her. To him, even the mermaids would feel threatened when they were near her presence, until someone interrupted his rambling. It was none other than Cesare, who greeted Adele when she entered his office after silencing his assistant. The protagonist greets him as well. It seemed this was the first time they saw each other since the other day when Cesare was in bed with her. Smiling, the Duke says he called someone different that day because he needed to take care of other matters so she could be at ease. The protagonist feels tense, although neither Eponine nor Gigi knew what they were discussing, until someone knocks on the door and a person named Igakora, the man who had previously led Flavia to her ship, enters the room. The Duke explains that Ager would now be Adele's bodyguard, which makes her think about the Cora family, looking at Eponine. As the Duke explains that indeed Ager was Eponine's younger brother, the protagonist notices that he was a very young man. As Eponine's younger brother, Ager bows to her, and Adele also bows in greeting, promising that he would strive to serve her. Beside them, Gigi notes that the protagonist was quite perceptive, and the Duke responds that if that were true, she wouldn't have followed a random servant who deceived her so easily. Gigi complains that not even a month had passed since Adele arrived at the mansion, until he notices that they should head to another place. Caesar agrees because the time passed so quickly that he barely noticed. They could conclude the meeting right there. Since he could barely endure it any longer, especially for the well-being of his little sister, he exchanges glances with Adele, leaving the others puzzled once again. Leaving the Duke's office, she walks ahead with Eponine following close behind, thinking that it was all sheer madness. The foolish Duke had a big ego, but he was the first to get emotional and attack in such a manner. After that, he completely changed his behavior, distancing himself from her, even though he looked at her that way. That was the first time Adele was so close to the Duke. She was so distracted that she couldn't think of anything else. These thoughts were quite useless for the protagonist, who frowned at herself while looking ahead, trying to convince herself that it was all fine because Caesar was just a shameless womanizer, but she still couldn't help being affected every time she thought of him. A little later, the butler, Ernest, appears at the bottom of the stairs to speak with the protagonist. Descending the stairs ahead, Eponine asks, "What happened?" And he approaches to whisper something to the maid. Her eyes widen in surprise, and she responds that he should inform them that they still needed time to finalize the details of the dress. As Ernest leaves, the maid quickly turns to Adele, announcing that she had a visitor waiting for her and she should hurry to the star room right away. As she prepares her, Eponine explains that, apparently, the lady wanted to meet the protagonist because Caesar announced her existence to the world. Nervously, she even theorizes that maybe the lady might know about the contractual relationship they have, so Adele should not lie to her, and just remain silent when there is no confirmation, to which the protagonist remains quiet. A little later, the maid finishes adjusting her dress and hopes things go well for her lady. The protagonist walks towards the hall to meet the person who called her, and she is impressed. It was a room with dark colors, unlike the atmosphere that surrounded Saint Marc, but at the same time it had a dazzling glow. It was indeed very beautiful from her point of view, and seated at the table inside that room was a woman with white hair and golden eyes. Adele feels she should start with greetings, even though in Saint Marc it was customary for superiors to greet first. But this was an exception, and so the protagonist greets the lady first, apologizing for doing so late and introducing herself as Adelaide Bonaparte. The woman remains silent, observing Adele, and pushes a book towards her, greeting her back and saying her name is Eva. This was the woman everyone voted for as president, Eva Bonaparte. It was a fact that she had a good reputation, but her physical health prevented her from speaking, and this was revealed long after the master of the mansion entered. Eva asks if the tea was to Adele's liking, and she agrees that it had a great aroma, and so the two continue interacting through speech and writing. The protagonist had doubts about what Eva wanted to ask so much, writing and erasing multiple times on the same page. A little later, Eva writes that Adele was a very beautiful girl, making Adele respond that it was indeed a cute compliment. Moreover, Eva assumed that Caesar must like her very much and asks if there was any inconvenience. In response, Adele says she has been well cared for and in good hands thanks to the actions of her good brother. Eva asks if the boy treated her well and how he treated her, which made her look away, not knowing how to answer because the foolish Duke was attracted to her. As Adele hesitated, Eva writes again and asks if she was waiting for an opportunity to seduce Caesar. This catches her by surprise, and she quickly denies that she would never do such a thing. So Eva asks her to speak freely because she was on her side, and Adele states that this would never happen, and she wouldn't even dare to think about anything like that. The woman says she doesn't care where she came from, and Adele asks her to stop interrogating her because she didn't approach Caesar with that intention. Under the woman's intense gaze, the protagonist does not yield and continues staring back, until finally Eva writes an apology, explaining that she needed to be sure, because if Adele had really fallen in love with the Duke, she would need to place her in another family. This confused Adele, so Eva continues, explaining that she supposed it wouldn't be pleasant to have that kind of relationship between relatives. If that was the case, it wouldn't be necessary for there to be a marriage with Della Valle instead of Caesar. But anyway, to Adele's surprise, Eva states that she now recognized her as a Bonaparte. What Caesar had promised her, he could give even more, which kept the protagonist silent, wondering what exactly this woman's goal was. She said that if she was in love with Caesar, she would have to go to another family, making it unnecessary to form an alliance with Della Valle. After that intense silence, Eva smiles and writes that she just wanted her Caesar to be properly loved. That boy hadn't been happy since he was very young, and Lucrezia couldn't offer that happiness to him. Suddenly, the one who opened the doors to interrupt was none other than Caesar himself, who says that Eva was quite meddlesome. He walks over to them and snatches the notebook from Eva's hands, taking it to read what was written and smiling as he said she must have been very annoyed. Finally, he throws the notebook away while staring at Eva with that same smile that she returned. Caesar leans in close to her and says it was a pleasure to see her after so long, but they have somewhere to go now. Then he orders Adele to stand up and she follows his orders, holding his hand while asking Eva to stay healthy until the next time they meet. The two leave the room together, and the protagonist looks over her shoulder in the direction of the woman who remained seated inside. As the door slowly closed, Eva didn't stop giving that same smile until the end. At this, Caesar asks about her suggestion, and Adele says she rejected it, to which he agrees she did well because Eva should have more love for her grandchildren. However, the protagonist comments that she noticed they were going the wrong way because this was a hallway to the main entrance. And the Duke reminds her they were supposed to go out to a specific place, to which Adele thinks it must be just an excuse he had just made up too. Looking at Caesar, she sees he was smiling, saying he was going to take her to a place all women wanted to go. They take a carriage ride, and during it, the protagonist thinks she never imagined she would ride in something like this. The Bonaparte Sardou carriage was the most extravagant of all, so famous that it even appeared in the newspapers. In Santa, where the terrain was narrow and difficult for long rides, having a horse-drawn carriage meant it was from a prestigious family. When a horse-drawn Sardou carriage parades through the city, it was said that the whole country trembled because of the great power of the Bonaparte. On the streets of Bella Stella, it was when the carriage stopped and Adele realized that this was the first time she was going to this place. And now that she was entering this place, she realized that before, she was only allowed to observe when she lived on the streets. Over her shoulder, Adele sees Caesar, and she realizes that she wouldn't just be visiting an honored street, she would be accompanied by the Duke himself, who was smoking a cigar. At that moment, Caesar comments that Adele seemed happy, but strangely, she wasn't smiling. Turning towards him, the protagonist wonders what exactly he was talking about. The Duke smiles because she was like an open book, and Adele thinks it was impressive because most people wouldn't notice the difference. He says that this was the first time she had done something like this, so she might get used to this new life. With a smile, the Duke asks if it would be worth hiding something so beautiful. There was nothing wrong with smiling once in a while, especially with a beautiful face like hers. He questions if the reason she wasn't smiling was that she didn't like the company of a libertine. Slowly, Adele responds that this wasn't the case because she didn't hate him, so the Duke assumes it might be because she wasn't interested in him. Catching her by surprise again, she wonders why he had been behaving this way in the past few days. After all, she should be his younger sister, so she repeats that several times mentally to herself. Smiling, she replies that she was very interested, to which Caesar mentions that it must be hard to have a job. To Adele, she only saw him as a jerk who must be having fun with a girl he didn't really like. The carriage continues its journey down the street until it finally brakes and stops, and the Duke turns, realizing they have finally arrived. But before Caesar can open the door, Adele grabs his hands, catching him completely by surprise. Looking at her, the protagonist apologizes and explains that she only tried to open the door because she thought he might still be in pain from his injury. It would be bad if he moved too much again, so she looks away, saying that wasn't what she was thinking at all. Laughing, Caesar replies that when he looked at Eva's notebook, it seemed like it had really been used many times before. It seemed to have slightly hurt his pride, or so the Duke imagined as he opened the carriage door. And as shouts that the Blue Star had arrived spread through Delaval Street, everyone was told to stay in their places. People ran, shouting for everyone to quickly clean up the front counters to make everything perfect. Everyone wanted Caesar to pass by their shops and wanted to make sure he got to see the promotions of the last month, wondering what kind of girl he was accompanying this time. Meanwhile, Caesar guided Adele by the hand into the shops and the staff received them nervously. The Duke smiled and greeted them, explaining that he was there to buy some jewelry for his younger sister. But the pieces on display now seemed a bit too generic to be worthy of a Bonaparte, so he asked if they could remove all of them, and the staff followed his words accordingly. They then displayed other pieces, one of which was a 15-carat high-quality diamond ring that was flawless and colorless. Then there was also a cushion-cut necklace with a 9-carat ruby from Mogok. It was skillfully cut in a rose shape and featured a vivid color close to the ruby's brilliance made by a high-prestige artisan family. There was also a 10-carat emerald pendant, a rare item with a beautiful velvet texture. The shop owner, Lisa Zanotti, explains that all of these were the best high-end products selected by Bottega di Vezio. Despite saying these things, Lisa was mentally wondering what they were thinking now, because these were her shop's secret weapons. In silence, Adele picked up one of the pieces with her fingers to look at it, and Lisa grew worried because her lack of reaction seemed to suggest they at least had some decent pieces. Beside her, Caesar asks what they should do, because his sister didn't seem impressed at all, especially since her jewelry box was already full of similar things. Sighing, Adele replies that it wasn't that. It was just that all the pieces were beautiful, so she didn't know which one to choose. So the Duke suggests that they could take all of them, which instantly delighted Lisa as she received compliments. He insists they show a few more items that would suit his younger sister, and of course, the shop owner eagerly agrees to do so quickly. Mentally, Lisa wondered if Caesar really had a sister and what was going on, because she had never heard of this before. She really didn't know if Adele was a real sister or if there was something more behind all of this. But the truth was that she was of noble birth. If that weren't the case, there was no explanation for the aura of high class that emanated from Adele, who didn't even react to seeing the jewelry that would drive most women crazy. Lisa wondered what she should recommend to make this young lady react with that sharp look. While searching for new pieces, she widened her eyes and said that it might not be as valuable as the other jewels, but she thought those pearls could suit Adele very well, rotating a pair of earrings for display. Caesar agreed that they looked lovely, and stepped closer to pick up one of the earrings, asking the protagonist for her opinion on them. She kept the same reaction as she told him that she hadn't pierced her ears yet, which surprised the shop owner. Because most girls have their ears pierced from a young age, she never considered this possibility, to which the Duke joked that his mother had kept her well preserved. He suggests that Adele could try them on over her ears to see how the earrings would look in combination with her appearance. So, Adele brushes her hair away from her ears and lets Caesar place the earring over her earlobe to see how it looks, impressing both the shop owner and Caesar, who agreed that the earrings would look great on her. Lisa was enchanted because Adele had a mysterious aura around her, and she snapped out of her thoughts when the Duke stated they would take the earrings. However, Caesar noticed that Adele still hadn't found anything that particularly pleased her, but the protagonist comments that she actually liked one, and she points to the brooch on the Duke's shoulder, and he says it is a rather common one while removing it from his clothing. The shop owner thinks to herself that it indeed suits the Duke's appearance more, but it is a fairly simple brooch overall. Still, Adele takes the brooch and smiles, saying it matches the color of Caesar's eyes since they are the same color. She smiles and says she likes this one, which delights Lisa even more while the Duke remains silent. The shop owner looks at the two and thinks that although they had lived apart their whole lives, they didn't even seem to share the same blood. If she were in Caesar's place, she certainly wouldn't be able to leave this person all alone. With a slow smile, the Duke comments that he has often been told that women are scary. Then he asks Lisa to find a similar piece of jewelry and have it made, to which she happily agrees, promising to find one of the highest quality. With that, the Duke decides they can move on to the next shop now, and as they leave, the owner thanks them for their purchase. On the carriage ride back at night, Caesar asks if Adele didn't like the jewelry in the shops, and she replies by asking if there is any woman who doesn't like jewelry. But the Duke was curious to know why she didn't seem very happy with any of it, and she looks away, responding that it's not like she can take them with her when she's gone. At this, Caesar feels that she had a sharp thought. Roughly speaking, the purchases weren't for Adele the shoeshine girl, but an investment for his younger sister. There was no reason to expect a kiss after giving her jewelry, as was common with other young women. As she looked outside the window, the protagonist saw something that caught her attention, and Caesar asks what happened. She slowly replies that it was nothing. She was just looking at a store called Secretum, one she had only seen from afar before. With a smile, the Duke says that place is a cheap store. The founder's lace she bought that day should have been 3 times more expensive than anything there. Still, the protagonist continues to stare at the shop before slowly responding that she understands and thanks her brother. Back at the mansion in her room, Eponine comments that even though he is the Duke, it seemed like he spent a huge amount of money, which should have made Adele feel quite lucky. It had been a bit challenging to dress her appropriately with just what they had in the mansion. But as expected, she always looks stunning in a backless dress, and the protagonist replies that she must have a beautiful back. After dressing her, the maid asks which shoes Adele would like to wear, looking at the wide selection available. Then Adele responds that she wanted the pair in bright yellow, and that's when Aguel approaches, suggesting he could help her with that. She sits down and allows him to put them on, simply watching as he touches her heel with great delicacy. Adele feels his touch is completely different from Flavia's hands, and Aguel lifts his eyes toward her, their gazes meeting for a few seconds. She asks if there is a problem, and he quickly denies that there is none, looking back down at her feet as he finishes pulling on the shoe. Then, Eponine tells her that the lessons would resume that day and would be held in the area hall, which was located in the outer area. Perhaps Adele wasn't familiar with it yet, so Aguel would escort her. After hearing the instructions, the protagonist wonders who the new person responsible for her lessons would be. Upon arriving at the lesson location, Adele and Caesar meet and greet each other, and the Duke approaches, commenting that as she might have noticed, he would be responsible for her ballroom practice lessons for the next few days. Without changing her expression, Adele asks what she should do because she is very grateful, but the Duke can clearly see the displeasure on her face. So he just gives a tense smile and extends his hand for the protagonist to take, which she does without a second thought. Adele asks if he really intends to practice dancing with her, and he asks back if she truly isn't interested in him, because she seems to worry too much. In response, the protagonist notes that he was injured because of her, and Caesar reminds her that he had also stepped on her feet before, creating an uncomfortable silence between them until Adele asks if no one ever taught him how to show love or have humanity. Smiling, he asks back where humanity lies between a man and a woman, which he considers a naive thing. The Bonapartes always sit at the head of places, the furthest spot from the entrance with the best ventilation. He shows where the orchestra was located and turns on the music inside the hall before looking at Adele again, inviting her to dance. She takes his hand and the Duke moves closer to kiss the back of her hand, explaining that the kiss should always be brief. Men who did it for too long were fools, so she could always hit them between the legs if necessary. The Duke explains that the grip should be quick and there should be a wide distance between them, and then the two begin to step together. Caesar notices that she was looking to the side and reminds her that this is not how she should be looking during the dance. With that, he pulls her closer and says they have a problem because it seems to be a bit cold. Teasing Adele because she was wearing a backless dress, he asks if she knew the virtue of the waltz. As the protagonist remains silent, he explains that the gentleman should be attractive and the lady should be beautiful, so he would lead her, and asks her to follow his steps. The two continue practicing and dancing in the hall to the music as Adele follows the Duke's steps, who keeps smiling until he finally gets cheerful, praising her because she was really good at it. And they both continued dancing even more harmoniously than before. Throughout the entire time, the protagonist wonders why this man would look at someone as if he wanted to desire them. How could something like this be sincere? When they take a break, the protagonist sighs after having danced so much, thinking the sea must be suffering with so much resentment. As the dance continues, Caesar guides her not to raise her head too much while dancing with him. There wasn't any other man in Fornetti who danced as well as he did. She agrees with his instructions, and the Duke smiles, saying it would be a shame if she said she didn't want to go with, Miss Adele Valley. And he responds that it's okay because that wouldn't happen, to which Caesar shakes his head because he couldn't be so sure. People always changed, but Adele assures him that this was not the case because that would never happen. She was absolutely certain, which makes him fall silent before saying that so far she was doing well, so they could continue a bit more from now on. and the protagonist agrees again. Until while they were practicing in the hall, the doors opened for two people who were suddenly entering. These people were Eva and Lucrezia, and Lucrezia smiles as she greets Eponine, who is surprised to see the lady there so suddenly, especially after the past confusion. Lucrezia explains that Eva asked her to see Caesar and Adele, but the Duke becomes serious the moment he hears this. Not pleased with the presence of the two women, he continues dancing with the protagonist, asking her not to pay attention to either of them and to focus only on him now. The music continues in the hall, and Adele could hear Lucrezia gossiping with Eva that she probably wasn't good at dancing. There shouldn't have been any debutantes where she came from. She mocks because Adele should never have heard about the waltz before, and if she keeps this up, it wouldn't be easy for her to adapt to the social world. The elder must have been right. The balls that gather the most people are those of Bonaparte, so Adele would have to endure great pressure from so many gazes. Indeed, it wasn't easy unless you were born with great talent, so she hoped Adele could get through it without getting too nervous. While focusing on the voices, Adele ends up taking a misstep, but Caesar quickly holds her against his chest, asking her to follow him. A little later, the Duke smiles and approaches the women watching, commenting that he never imagined Eva would come there without warning, especially accompanied by Miss Della Valle, which unsettled Lucrezia because the Duke was no longer calling her by her name as he did before the incident with the maid. Despite stammering to ask him to do so, Caesar ignores her and questions what they were doing there, not seeming too happy to see them interrupting the lesson. Eva writes that she was looking for a young woman who could help Adele enter society, so Lucrezia volunteered for this role. Besides, it seemed good to Eva that the young ones interacted with each other, to which Caesar jokes that his grandmother didn't know her grandson only liked to communicate using his body. Adele thinks he was still acting the same way. Even in front of his grandmother, watching Eva suggests that he get married soon while Caesar jokes with her. The lady mentions that Lucrezia was also great at dancing and suggests that they could try dancing together, so Adele could have an example of how it's done. Smiling, Lucrezia thanks Eva for the compliments and states that for Adele's sake, she could do this for as long as necessary. Turning with a dark smile, she tells Adele she would love to help her, reminding Adele of that same smile from when they met in the past. Remembering all the things that came from Lucrezia makes the protagonist break into a cold sweat with nervousness until Caesar steps between the two, shielding her from that intense gaze and feeling. Saying that if this was a request from Eva, he would obviously grant it, and he extends his hand for Lucrezia to take, making her quite excited. The two move away and Adele sighs. Then Eva asks if she really felt nothing for Caesar, to which the protagonist responds that they are siblings. Writing again, Eva questions in that case why the Duke cared so much about Adele to the point of protecting her without hesitation. She falls silent at the question while Caesar and Lucrezia continue dancing and moving around the hall to the music, looking like a perfect couple made for each other. Then, after a moment, she replies to Eva again that it was only because she was his younger sister, and there was nothing more between them, just like she had said in the past. When their dance ends, Caesar and Lucrezia, who was leaning on his arm, return, with her complaining that her feet hurt and she needed his support. Seeing them approach, Eva claps and praises them, asking when they plan to marry, to which Lucrezia thanks her for always looking out for her so well. At this, Eva smiles and writes that she needed to leave because she had things to do, and asks Caesar to take good care of Lucrezia, who was her guest. Caesar stares at her seriously as Eva asks him to invite Lucrezia for dinner, entrusting this to her handsome and dear grandson while she leaves. The doors close, leaving the three in tense silence inside the hall, alone until the Duke lights a cigar. He asks Lucrezia if she liked the idea, questioning the fact that she had been coming to the mansion quite frequently in recent days. Pressed, Lucrezia stammers that she couldn't just stay quiet, looking away because Adele was trying so hard and that worried her. Interrupting her, the Duke states that he didn't need her and could stop this right now, to which Lucrezia asks if she should really do that and just pretend she didn't see him going down the wrong path. But he refuses because he was free to meet other ladies, and there was nothing wrong with that. However, Lucrezia claims that she thought he would realize it over time, but she couldn't just keep watching as he headed toward ruin, stammering that she made her way there despite her shame and asks how he could not notice any of her efforts in this way. She cries as she says she loves him, repeating it several times, saying she would always love Cesare with a psychotic and almost obsessive love in her eyes. After a moment of silence, she shrinks and looks away, mentioning that it was fine if he still didn't want to accept it. She could wait as long as necessary. Even when Cesare decides to go to heaven, she would remain waiting for him because the only person who truly loves him is her, and no one else could do that. Faced with this declaration of love, Cesare takes a slow drag on his cigar and dismissively questions what kind of love that was when she couldn't even offer anything in return. This shocks her and also makes her cough when he blows the cigar smoke in her face, watching her recoil and squirm. The Duke tells Adele that the lessons are over for the day and that she can return to her room now, to which she slowly agrees. but Lucrezia shouts in denial because Eva asked for Adele and her to become friends, so she quickly grabs the protagonist's arm, stammering because, after all, not even the Duke could dare defy Eva's orders, which makes him widen his eyes, throwing his cigar to the floor and staring intensely at Lucrezia as if he were furious. But Adele calls him in an attempt to calm him down, asking him not to mind it because she would like to have dinner with him and Lucrezia as well. Looking at the lady who is holding her, she says there was also something she would like to discuss with her, not backing down amidst the tension between the two who are arguing. So the trio gathers to have dinner together, but the Duke doesn't seem happy with the way things are going, just fiddling with his drink, distracted. Lucrezia asks if the food wasn't to his liking, because he hadn't even tasted anything yet, and smiling, he replies that watching Adele eat was enough to satisfy him, making her freeze in place. This enrages Lucrezia, who cuts her meat with a dark expression while keeping Adele in her line of sight, as if she wanted to cut Adele herself with her utensils. Finally, the protagonist asks her brother if she could escort Lucrezia after dinner, expressing a wish for it to be just the two of them. This makes Cesare curious because it was the first time she had asserted herself so determinedly without faltering in her voice or gaze. Sighing, the Duke allows her to do as she wishes, and Adele thanks him for it. After taking a drink, he stands up to leave the hall, surprising Lucrezia with how quickly he is leaving, but without caring in the slightest. Cesare hopes the goddess allows them to never meet again. He then asks Agar to keep an appropriate distance while escorting Adele, and the bodyguard agrees to the Duke's orders. As he leaves with Jude following him up the stairs, leaving the two women alone to return to his office and occupy his mind. On the way, Jude says it has been more challenging to get the materials to build the galleon Cesare ordered because apparently the Queen of Trivium gave the command. In response, the Duke finds it strange because even so, they should try to establish a schedule for the shipyard and also find a merchant who cannot obtain a trade permit, and his assistant quickly agrees with him. Looking over the balcony, he realizes he has arrived at a good time because he could watch Adele and Lucrezia walking together in the garden and also take the opportunity to overhear their discussion. On the path they took in the garden after the meal, Lucrezia thanks the protagonist because it was a pleasure to see her and asks if she could visit her again. The protagonist agrees that it was indeed nice to see her, but it would be better to discuss a future meeting with her brother. Meeting Lucrezia was a great pleasure for Adele, but Cesare's wishes would always take precedence over hers, so she should yield to his desires above all else. Smiling, Lucrezia says that the meeting that day was approved by Eva, but the protagonist insists that Eva would also respect the will of the Bonaparte family. Lucrezia mentions she would like to keep a significant regularity of meetings and asks if she made a mistake believing that Adele felt the same, or perhaps she did not believe in friendship between ladies. And the protagonist denies all of this because obviously such friendships existed among many other noble ladies. But everything indicated that on that day, Lucrezia focused her efforts on her relationship with Cesare, not with Adele as she had argued before. This concerned Lucrezia, who insists that she just wanted to form a friendship with her and get closer as they should, as Eva suggested earlier. But since she still felt a bit uncomfortable, she was trying to get help from Cesare, which made Adele look at her seriously, not believing her feeble excuses, asking if she was saying she wasn't really declaring her love for Cesare earlier, and if that was the case, she should be smarter and try to win over the Duke instead of trying to keep Adele under control, which shocked Lucrezia and made both Cesare and Jude laugh. As the lady was too shocked, Adele states that's exactly what she heard. Even if she disappeared, it didn't mean the Duke would love her, again making both men laugh loudly. And Cesare whispers that Miss de Laval should never have heard such sincere words before in her life. Lucrezia yells and asks if she was treating her like an idiot, because it was obvious she was being looked down upon. Cesare shouldn't love Adele. He was always showing a bad attitude toward the women who were near him, which Cesare agrees with while Jude chuckles. But the protagonist remains firm, saying that it doesn't matter what he thinks or how he behaves toward her. She has to stay there if that's what he wants. She was just clarifying that it wouldn't do any good to rebel against Adele, again irritating Lucrezia because it was absurd to be judged this way. Until the protagonist states that, to be honest, she never intended to come between her and Cesare in any way, which makes the Duke fall deadly silent, listening to everything. He didn't know what Lucrezia had been thinking during that time, but Adele and Cesare only have a normal sibling relationship. A long silence falls between the two, and even the Duke can barely move from his seat in front of the protagonist's words, only smoking his cigar, until Lucrezia mentions that the previous time, Adele and Cesare seemed quite close, and the protagonist replies that at that moment, a small accident had happened, and that was why the Duke was giving her a little more attention than usual, which was obvious when a family member was in need. If the accident in question hadn't occurred, there would be no reason for him to worry about her, and therefore, there would be no excuse for the Duke to spend more time by her side. After all, Adele was just a younger sister who suddenly appeared and would soon be ready to marry. And now Lucrezia was glaring at her furiously. She states that her brother, Cesare, was a wonderful person, and they got along very well, But despite hearing this, the Duke couldn't help but feel bothered because Adele clearly said that she didn't care, and it wasn't her business whom he spent time with. While listening to the protagonist say this, the Duke recalls all the good and bad moments he had with Adele, and frowning, he wonders why he feels bad. A little later, as Lucrezia returns home in her carriage after the entire conversation and meal with the Bonapartes, she talks with Anais, her maid. She mentions that Adele told her she would help her arrange frequent meetings with Cesare, but she wondered if it was true or if it could just be a lie. Anais asks if this wasn't just a simple act to appease her, making Lucrezia consider the possibility for a few moments. But it didn't seem like Adele's eyes were saying that. Instead, it seemed she didn't truly love Cesare. After all, she always appeared so serious and indifferent when beside him. This wouldn't be possible for an ordinary woman meeting him, especially since her entire body would tremble just being in the Duke's presence. It was only possible that Adele had a poor view or understood her own position very well to act like that, controlling herself perfectly, unlike other women. The maid questions whether it would be better to reveal Adele's identity to society, but Lucrezia explains that if she did, the Duke would distance himself from her completely. In fact, Lucrezia even liked the idea because by all indications, Cesare was a bit irritated with her. This makes her smile because only in this way could she get closer little by little in a safe manner. It was depressing, but there was nothing more she could do for her future with him. If Adele truly intended to help them, she was excited because she could see Cesare forever and every day of her life. Even if she couldn't yet have formal meetings with the Duke due to self-reflection, she wanted to be able to spend as much time with him as possible. Then the maid asks if her plan succeeds. It might mean that Jose and Adele would end up getting married according to what was written in the agreement, and Lucrezia agrees that it would certainly be the case. However, Anais reminds her that the protagonist's true status was not of nobility. But even so, a person like her would marry Jose, which made Lucrezia pause to think about it for only a few seconds. Laughing, she says that this would be Jose's problem, shocking the maid, who breaks into a cold sweat at this reaction. Lucrezia mentions that Adele looked enough like a lady, so there shouldn't be any problem because the most important thing now was that she could continue with Cesare safely and without any agreement. If he intervenes in her plans, she would just need to find another way to get closer to the Duke and have him for herself. Therefore, Adele's origins should be kept entirely secret, and she asks if her maid understood, to which she stammers a yes. Above all, if Adele was really someone from outside, in the end, she was nothing and no one. Meanwhile, in his office, the Duke began writing a letter to his dear younger sister on blue paper with delicate black ink. He writes that he would like to express his regret that they could not continue their dance lessons together due to a deep concern from his doctor. Even if they had mastered all of nature's traps and the art of controlling the human mind, all of this seemed insignificant now. And it did not compare to the joy that shone on her face, so he ends the letter by signing it with his name, Cesare Bonaparte. After reading this letter, the protagonist asks Eponine to prepare the same paper and ink used by her brother. So she does, handing it to her lady, suggesting that if she needs any reference to write her response, she could help. But Adele assures her she is fine. That's because she had read Dante, the book of the Divine Comedy, which was full of theological, philosophical, and political aspects. In response, Adele writes to her brother Cesare that the time spent beside him was exceptionally dazzling to the point of making her travel to the stars. She knew that if she desired something even greater, her wishes would conflict with those who brought her there. To Cesare, who had taken care of her with such compassion, she asks for mercy, philanthropy without even complaining. She could say that all the goodness of creation was gathered within Cesare, and she signs it with her name, Adelaide Bonaparte. After writing the letter, the protagonist handed it to Eponine, who was surprised to see her come up with a response so quickly. Adele asked if that wasn't a good thing, hesitating, but the maid affirmed that it was great because from now on she wouldn't have to worry anymore. With this assurance, Adele asked if she would have a new teacher now that she no longer had dance lessons with her brother. It was then that a voice approached, commenting that they could help her with practice, and Agata stepped forward, knowing that even though it wasn't an escort's job, still, there was no problem in using him for a while, so he extended his hand to Adele, who was caught off guard by his initiative, to help her with the waltz dance practice, and she hesitantly extended her hand to hold his, thanking him as Agata kissed the back of her hand. The two left the room and went to the ballroom where they talked a bit before starting the music and practicing again. At one point, the protagonist's foot faltered, but that didn't stop Ager from continuing to dance melodiously. Even though his movements were a bit stiff, he was a good dance partner because he didn't make her as nervous as Caesar. Ager's gaze wasn't that of someone who wanted to devour her. It was simply respectful and careful with the training. When she first met Ager, she could smell the odor of blood and corpses on him, a smell so distinctive that only the inhabitants of Camorra could recognize it. It became obvious to the protagonist that Cesar used him to get rid of the filth. Perhaps he was even the one who took care of Madame Flavia, which was the reason for naming him her escort. This made her consider that it was just so, if necessary, he could kill her quickly and silently. Before, Adele tried to escape hell, but ended up in a place just like it. So noticing the sword at his waist, she asked if he was good with it. He replied that as an escort, he couldn't answer those questions, averting his gaze, which made Adele wonder how she could trust an escort who withheld information. After a moment of silence, he agreed that it made sense, and the two continued dancing for some time until nightfall, where Adele told her maid that the next day she would visit the outer palace, which made Eponine question the reason for the visit. She replied that high society people frequented that place, including her brother. That's why she believed that observing those people would help her act more like a true lady. She would blend in unnoticed and take Aeger with her. Eponine thought it was the first time she had heard such a request, responding that she would probably need to ask the master's permission. When Adele asked her to do it immediately, the maid agreed and excused herself to leave for a moment. Left alone in the room, the protagonist thought about how persistent Lucrezia was. For her, simply helping her win over her brother wasn't enough. If she wanted to understand him, she would need to observe him. In any case, her role was to maintain the agreement between Bonaparte and Della Valle, not stop Lucrezia. Even if their agreement was discovered, Caesar would continue with the plan. That's the kind of man he was. A little later, Eponine returned, informing that Caesar had agreed, but also said she couldn't miss her practical dance lessons, and that she should prepare because soon she would have a new teacher. And so Adele and Aeger set out on their trip, actually positioning themselves to be able to observe Caesar from the best possible spot. In response, the protagonist said she was sure they wouldn't be noticed from that distance. After hiding behind the trees, Aeger noticed that he was leaving. The two watched him leaving with several other unknown people, who seemed to be Maya Lucy Gazzolo, Libby Rossi, the current leader and heir of the Rossi family, and the former president of the Signoria Academy, the elder Gianni. They were the most important men in Santner gathered there, and they all bowed to Caesar. This impressed Adele, who simply observed in silence the entire procession, realizing that they were there to visit Caesar. She became so engrossed that she forgot for a moment that she was the younger sister of someone like that. It seemed like a truly distant reality. But Aeger responded that it wasn't, as this was now her family. Holding hands, Adele agreed that she should strive to do a good job, letting a ladybug climb onto her fingers. Back at the mansion in the afternoon, Caesar heard from a servant that Adele was at 10 o'clock sharp, and he looked in that direction, knowing exactly where they had been watching from, and wondered what exactly they were doing. He had heard that she wanted to go to the outer area of the palace, but nothing about observing him from a distance like that. The servant asked what his master would like to do, and he responded that he didn't mind it. Thinking that it probably had something to do with the agreement he made with Lucrezia, Caesar imagined that maybe Adele was planning to observe his routine and report every step. A few days passed, and Adele and Aeger continued to watch Caesar, making him feel that she was indeed a stubborn girl. It reminded him of when the protagonist had said she didn't intend to come between him and Lucrezia, which made him wonder what he had done to make her hate him so much. Even though he was responsible for the current situation, it hurt his ego that she continued to reject him. He had never been rejected in that way before. It seemed like Adele had standards that he didn't meet, even when everyone said they looked like a beautiful couple. Next to him, Gigette was yelling at Caesar to listen to him, though he was completely lost in thought. Questioning why he was acting that way, many VIP guests wanted to leave, and he was blocking the way by standing there. Ignoring the complaint, Caesar said that if Adele asked any questions about his schedule, they shouldn't answer, but instead encourage her to ask him directly. He walked away from the entrance, leaving the confused assistant behind, but agreeing to follow the orders anyway. Later, he lay in bed thinking, hearing from Eponine that the protagonist had been studying a lot on her own lately. Even though she visited him during the day, much of her time was spent studying at night. And Aeger also reported that when he was in a restricted area, she would ask him to practice dancing with her, thus becoming an excellent dancer over time, which made Caesar wonder if she had really improved just by dancing with another guy. It could be a lie to say she wasn't interested. Maybe the deal with Lucrezia was just a big trick. He wondered how good Adele had become at the waltz, and time passed until he was working in his office again. After his assistant reported that the report had already been delivered, Caesar asked if there was any news about Trivium, and he responded that they hadn't gotten anything yet, but as expected, it was absurd for them to dare to take away his access to the sea. After a moment, the assistant mentioned that Adele had asked about Caesar's schedule, catching his attention. As he listened to him explain that he hadn't provided the information she wanted and suggested she visit Caesar in person, this made him smile. Pleased that Adele would come soon as she had said before that she hated him, it was better to give her space to make the first move. He considered that perhaps he should just invite her for lunch together until Adele herself appeared in the office. Gigi was delighted to see her, and Cesare quickly grabbed him by the collar to stop him from running toward her. After greeting her, he asked what brought her there, noticing that the protagonist was strangely wringing her hands. She averted her eyes, saying she wanted to know if he had any free time the next day, because she would like to spend some time with him as his sister. But Cesare knew she was lying. Adele explained that visiting places full of high-ranking nobles would help her practice proper etiquette. but Cesare imagined that she wanted to arrange a meeting between him and Lucrezia. He responded with a smile that there was a reasonably decent place, and it would be at midnight, worrying Adele because she didn't know if Lucrezia could make it at that hour. Then she asked where they were going, and he replied that he wouldn't tell just to avoid spoiling the surprise. When night fell and Cesare was leaving, Gigi asked if he really intended to take her, to which he replied that if he had planned to stop him, he should have done so earlier. But it would be difficult for Gigi because his master had been determined from the start. Even though Adele had lived in Kimura, she seemed very innocent in other aspects. He believed that perhaps because she had always lived as a man, until suddenly Adele appeared, asking where they were going, and Cesare replied that it was to a good place, turning and ordering her to go in first. After a moment of hesitation, she asked if Cesare intended to sell her. With a small smile, Cesare said that as someone from outside Kimura, that question certainly didn't surprise him. As the protagonist seemed quite tense, he realized that even talking about it had affected her somewhat. She was still human after all. Then he asked what Adele would do if he agreed with the idea, though he didn't think it would be much different from handing her over to Ezra. After seeing that expression on her face, he said it was a pity, but he only intended to show her another side of high society. Besides, he wanted to see what kind of woman his sister really was. Then he picked up a mask that had a mouth compressor. Even though she was caught off guard by the idea of biting into it, she was still forced to wear the mask by Cesare, who ordered her not to let it fall. Later, they traveled to Delicia Jury Street to the Galeotto Club, and the protagonist wondered what kind of place they were going to while wearing masks. Adele realized it must be some kind of club, and they were greeted by a man wearing another mask who remarked that it had been a long time since he'd seen them. He knew Cesare was the owner of the club, so at the very least he wished Cesare would visit more often. However, he questioned why his companion was wearing a Moretta mask. Since Cesare said nothing, the man simply concluded that it would be a grand night and wished them to enjoy themselves. They descended a long staircase until they arrived inside the club where several couples were dancing together. But everyone focused on Adele upon noticing she was wearing a Moretta mask, deeply staring at her and frightening her. Soon, Cesare wrapped his arm around her shoulder and pulled her close, making her wonder what Moretta meant. After a moment, she realized she had been left alone by Cesare, and an attendant wearing a clown mask noticed that he had cleared the way. He asked if she even knew what Moretta meant. It meant that no matter what happened, she would remain silent. It could also be a sign that she desired to be attacked, which soon led to several eyes and hands being directed at her. People tried to grab Adele by the wrist, and from a distance, Ager asked Cesare if he should deal with these people. But instead of agreeing, Cesare ordered him to let them continue, merely watching as they pushed Adele to the ground and laughed at her. Despite being treated that way, Adele said nothing and didn't react, which was driving Cesare crazy. He approached and struck one of the men to get him out of the way, still watching the protagonist remain completely silent, wanting her to admit once and for all that all men were the same and that she knew only a small part of them. He wanted to see her cry silently, run, or just decide to cling to him once and for all. The masks and hands kept laughing and taking advantage of the protagonist, who stayed perfectly still on the ground. This confused Cesare, making him wonder why she wasn't reacting, just trembling and staying there. Unless she fought back, like when she had threatened to cut his throat before, things would be different. But thinking about how she had challenged him before made Cesare realize that Adele was far too stubborn, so he raised his voice to announce that she wanted to leave. Everyone backed off immediately, and then he descended from where he had been watching. Approaching her, he said that she seemed curious about high society and removed her mask while asking if she had found it fun. Adele just stared at him and took off her mask, silently crying in a way that caught him off guard. She was the kind of woman who didn't even cry after falling from a mansion roof and almost dying. Even when she attacked him, she held the scissors firmly. That's why he asked why she was crying. And that's when Adele realized the state she was in, standing up quietly and running away. Ager said he would escort her, and Cesare said nothing despite wondering why he was feeling like absolute human trash. Out in the street, Adele fell to her knees, thinking that even knowing this, she had still decided to follow him everywhere. Cesare's intention had been to reprimand her for being presumptuous, to show her that he could throw her into hell with just a wave of his hand. Should she have just grabbed the bottle on the ground, broken it, and killed them all? Or should she simply have resisted until the end? Remembering Cesare's challenge made her think she should be a lady, act like Cesare's younger sister, like a true lady should, because someone should have come to save her. But she ended up making a stupid mistake. She had been presumptuous for a moment, thinking she really was his sister. Even so, it wasn't necessary for him to go so far. If he had just given her a hint, she would have quickly understood and returned to her place as the shoeshine girl who knew her place. Looking back, she noticed that Ager was watching her with pity, and he knelt down saying that he had been watching her closely to ensure nothing would put her at risk. There was nothing dangerous there, which made Adele smile, thinking that he was so unreachable that a simple shoeshine girl shouldn't dare to try to understand the situation. Akior offered a handkerchief, and she used it to wipe her tears. After asking if she should clean it and return it, the escort refused, so Adele threw it away and stood up to leave. The two returned to where Caesar was, and she apologized to him for not being able to behave like a lady. He asked back if she wasn't upset because she hadn't managed to call Lucrezia, saying it would have been better if she had just requested a normal meeting. His words made the protagonist surprised because Caesar had known about her plans from the beginning. After a long silence, Adele responded that she will obediently accept any punishment he wanted to give her. This made Caesar just watch her while puffing on his cigar for a moment, turning his back to her, irritated. Suddenly, he found himself remembering when he was still a child, running towards a carriage at sunset, until he fell to his knees on the ground, panting from running so much and crying painfully until a voice called his name. A woman knelt before him and touched his shoulder, saying with a choked voice something about the world that he couldn't quite remember. That morning, he woke up in his bed realizing he had had a horrible nightmare, so he got up to get dressed. During this moment, Gigio began with the day's schedule, mentioning that he had a meeting at 11 with the director of the Lana Art Studio, and at noon he would have lunch with Adele, which made him question whether it shouldn't be a lunch with the Duchess of Fort. And the assistant responded that last time he had asked to postpone the lunch with Forte and asked if he should just cancel today's lunch as he had heard that Adele had been crying the night before. With a laugh, he questioned what the problem was with letting a shoeshine girl cry, which made Gigio fall silent before simply agreeing with the order. In response to this reaction, Caesar told him to get straight to the point of the problem, and Gigio responded with a slight smile that as someone from Kimura, he felt sorry for her. Caesar couldn't possibly imagine what it was like to live in that place, still wondering how miserable those without family or money could be. Everything worst was there. Those who couldn't predict the worst in Kimura would die first. Even so, Caesar cut him off, reminding him that they weren't in Kimura, and Gigio said that this only made everything worse. She couldn't escape from there, and yet she couldn't be happy even being in a place like this. This made Caesar fall silent, thinking that Gigio wasn't usually the type of person to sympathize easily with others, which must have meant that what he had done to Adele was really that bad, making him question what kind of place Kimura was. Thus, he said that the lunch would proceed as planned, ordering Lucrezia to be invited in Adele's name because he knew she would come. This shocked Gigio, but Caesar continued, knowing that just thinking about Lucrezia was enough to make him lose his appetite. If the reason Adele and Lucrezia had made an agreement was purely for survival, it would be better to help establish the relationship between them. In any case, the shoeshine girl's debut in the social world should happen without flaws. If Lucrezia, as her friend, helped her, it would be easy for her to establish herself among the other women, which for Caesar was at the very least quite irritating despite everything. And later, Lucrezia arrived for a visit as expected. Later, he met with the two of them for another meal, and Lucrezia lit up upon seeing him, while Adele smiled a little, asking if he had slept well. Caesar noticed that her eyes were red, probably because she had cried all night. He approached as Lucrezia mentioned that they had been discussing the presentation ceremony since they had been at the club the previous night. It was obvious that Adele would be a little surprised, but it was something important to do before entering the social world. Slowly, the protagonist agreed, saying she understood, but didn't smile until she said that thanks to her brother, she had been able to participate in the ceremony safely, and she believed it had been a good experience. He commented that this must be why she spent the whole night crying, and she forced a smile, replying that she had only been lamenting that she hadn't yet managed to get rid of her country habits. And then the two stared at each other in an uncomfortable silence until Lucrezia intervened, saying that she could help Adele with that, and Caesar agreed that it was a good idea. They could meet often at the mansion until her debut. Adele agreed and asked Lucrezia to take care of her, saying she would be eternally grateful if she could teach her everything she needed to know. Lucrezia quickly agreed, stating that it was something friends did, and that she would be happy if they could meet more often and talk this way, certain that they could become great friends. And the two smiled at each other in a way that made Caesar feel like everything was going according to plan. Then Adele wiped her mouth, lowering her gaze to the food, which she had barely eaten since she arrived. Later, when Lucrezia said goodbye, she stammered, commenting that she had had a lot of fun that day with Caesar, walking and eating. And she also said that Adele shouldn't worry because she would certainly become a very popular lady in society. Caesar thought that he should ensure that happens, so he leaned closer to Lucrezia to wish her a safe journey. This made Lucrezia blush, deepening her love for him even more, stammering and promising that she would take good care of Adele, as the banquet would surely happen soon. After that farewell, she turned around, promising they would see each other again soon, leaving the mansion in her carriage. After a long silence, Adele thanked Caesar for inviting Lucrezia, as she wanted to be able to talk with her more. Then he abruptly approached Adele, questioning exactly what the problem was, and the protagonist responded that she didn't understand. He asked about her annoying behavior from before, making Adele smile and say she would act however he wished. Despite these words clearly angering him, the protagonist gave a cold smile, stating that if that was his wish, that's what she would do. Caesar asked again if that was a reason to cry, satisfied to see that she was either getting upset or on the verge of tears like the night before. Anything would be better than seeing her continue to play the ridiculous role of sister all the time. After a moment, Adele said he was right and apologized for overreacting. If there was something he didn't like, she would do whatever it took to fix it. And from now on, she would do her best to meet his expectations. He replied that for his sister, it seemed easy, and she agreed because it was his request, and she would surely manage to do it. She assured him that she would do everything as long as they were his orders, making Caesar wonder how he hadn't realized this until now. Adele would commit herself to Ezra because it was his will. When he had thrown her onto the bed before, the same shoeshine girl who had threatened him with scissors had cried when she was trapped in the middle of a crowd. And yet she hadn't wanted to rely on him, but on Ezra della Valle, which disgusted Caesar. Faced with this reaction, she hesitated before lowering her gaze and apologizing, promising that she would try her best in that regard too. Later, the protagonist returned to her room and curled up, which worried Aiga, but she assured him she was fine, remembering how she was called disgusting, though it wasn't exactly unexpected, which made her force a smile. She asked Aiga if they could go out to practice the waltz, as she couldn't become a lady overnight. Time passed, and the two continued rehearsing the dance to the music in the hall, looking for a way to distract themselves. People traveling in their carriages commented on how, despite the passage of time, the line to enter the mansion didn't shorten. It must have been due to the rumor about Adele's debut, which was alarming because the sister who had never been present suddenly appeared and finalized her engagement with the Della Valle family. But according to the rumors circulating on the streets of Bella Sella, the amount of money Caesar had spent on her exceeded 5 million. Some wondered if he would have gone that far if they weren't blood relatives. Besides that, Lucrezia had started to be invited frequently to the mansion. It was obvious that something was going on, and that day, everything could be clarified to the public when they all saw her officially. In the hall where everyone was gathered for the party, people praised Genevieve, who looked very beautiful that night. They commented that they hadn't yet seen Lucrezia, and Genevieve nervously laughed because that was exactly what she wanted to ask. Where had she gone? But suddenly, she hadn't even allowed her to take care of the Della Valle carriage. She had left a letter saying she would travel separately that day and apologized to Genevieve, which made her wonder what that meant. It was then that Caesar's arrival was announced, and everyone looked in his direction as he approached and walked through the crowd, dressed very elegantly. The women whispered about how he was always impressive, especially his thighs, even wondering if he would spend the night out again. Caesar approached to greet the people, council members, officers, young ladies, and gentlemen around. Thanking everyone for their presence that night, he said that once again, his birthday banquet had begun. And unlike the other members of the Bonaparte family, things would be handled differently. But he knew that speech was long and boring for everyone, so he would get straight to the point. Some of them might have heard rumors that he had a younger sister, and on this grand occasion, he would like to take the opportunity to introduce her. Thus, he gestured to Adele, stating that she had come from afar to warmly welcome everyone. And the protagonist presented herself before everyone, also dressed very elegantly, frustrating Genevieve because he hadn't introduced the sister to her first. A man asked if she was from Capolo, and Adele responded that she was. And he mentioned that a distant relative of his was from there as well. He said that if he had known her before, he would have liked to meet and talk with her more. And she explained that until 3 months ago, she was nothing but a simple girl. A gentleman would hardly have noticed her in that brief time, and he replied that pretending to be a common person with such grace should be impossible. She laughed, saying it seemed like he was trying to tease a debutante, something he denied, claiming he was only being honest as he kissed the back of her hand. Although Adele responded in a way that made the man happy, wanting to invite her to dance, she pulled her hand away from his. This left the men quiet, not understanding, but at the same time enchanted by her reserved and distant demeanor. Such grace and beauty were impressive to see in a lady at her debut, and everyone wanted to invite her to dance. Even Genevieve acknowledged her beauty. It was obvious that everyone was falling in love with her at that moment. To interrupt the moment, Genevieve asked loudly for permission to pass, but she had difficulty moving through so many people. Until Lucrezia noticed Genevieve being squeezed between the crowd, laughing slightly as she asked the protagonist if she could introduce a friend. This delighted Genevieve, as it seemed Lucrezia had been spending her time gathering information for this moment. Thus, Adele greeted Genevieve and introduced herself, allowing the girl to sit with them to join the conversation. Lucrezia gestured for Genevieve to sit on her right side. In social circles, it was customary to leave the seat next to the most important person empty until the end. In other words, Lucrezia was recognizing Adele as her superior, and Genevieve realized she had chosen wasn't the right person to ally with. When she tried to get closer, a few gentlemen teased her, prompting the protagonist to intervene, asking Genevieve if she had ever seen an eagle hunt. Eagles were heavy birds, unable to fly fast or too high. In the skies, they always lost to falcons because they were all greedy. They would fall to the ground, flapping their wings to try to scare away all the other birds. But Adele liked canaries. Genevieve's hair was a beautiful orange, just like a canary, so she told the men to back off because they had a different view from hers. The men nervously responded that it was just a harmless joke, and they didn't mean to target or offend Genevieve with it. But Adele cut them off, saying their jokes weren't funny and she knew very well they thought she was a fool. Amid the tension, people around commented that those two men were being rude to treat a Bonaparte that way. Even on a day like this, such disgrace was happening in front of a lady, making them want to inform Cesare. The men grew even more tense and quickly apologized before leaving. And Adele told Genevieve they shouldn't pay attention to the words of pathetic people. This made Genevieve tear up a little, surprised because although she always went through such things, Lucrezia had never protected her that way. When everything calmed down, Adele began talking about how there were no rare seas around San Malo, where marine life thrived, except for the northwestern side near Orkina. The lack of large bushes suitable for shipbuilding also played a role. That was why maintaining a good relationship with Sorig was inevitable. They must have heard that the Trevian Port Ducal Company had made contact with Sorig. The political conversation continued, and Genevieve felt a bit out of place because everyone was too engaged in it. Everyone was impressed with Adele's vast knowledge, believing she must have received an excellent education despite being so young. The protagonist smiled and replied that they probably thought of her as Dante's Beatrice. This prompted them to start mentioning passages from the book, bringing a smile to Adele, who then remarked that she was different from Beatrice. She referenced other classical literature like Giovanni and Francesco, making them feel like they wanted to have a long conversation with her. One of the men kneeled and made another literary reference to Adele, complimenting her as a beautiful woman, until suddenly Cesare appeared to interrupt the conversation, asking what exactly was going on there. Adele responded that they were just having a pleasant conversation, and the man who kneeled had merely said he would follow her to hell if necessary. Seeing the siblings talk, Genevieve thought they truly shared the same characteristics: arrogant, a bit distant, and extremely charming. Cesare laughed, saying the man before him couldn't even offer a ship, yet claimed he would follow him to hell. To think he would witness such seduction on his birthday. Laughing, Adele said that if he kept threatening others, no one would be able to talk to her again. Cesare continued, stating that maybe he just needed to take care of her himself with his own hands. Then he led her to dance, making Genevieve continue to think that even though they were just standing there, she was captivated by them. But she was caught by surprise because for some reason, Cesare seemed a little angry as he took her to dance. While they danced, Adele asked if her brother was feeling unwell, and he replied that she should stop with that annoying tone. There was no need to pretend. The protagonist kept her fake smile, saying that hurt her feelings, which was precisely his intention. When she said she would accept being hurt if it was his will, Cesare made a bold move in the dance. He asked what she would do if he went to her bed. Could she at least promise not to cry like she did last time? After a moment of surprise, Adele smiled and responded that she would welcome her brother with joy. This frustratingly reminded him of their waltz lessons, even though he had told Adele to act like his younger sister. Things were going too far, but the people around them were all impressed, thinking they made a beautiful pair of siblings. The protagonist asked if Ezra hadn't arrived yet because she thought Cesare was going to introduce them, which made him question why she was bringing up his name now. She explained that she hoped he hadn't forgotten the arranged engagement with the Del Valle family, which only enraged him even more. It was then that Ezra Del Valle's arrival at the hall was announced, and he approached the couple dancing in the middle of the ballroom. Ezra asked if she was Adelaide Bonaparte, making her avert her gaze toward the man behind Cesare, with light hair and violet eyes. She notices the slightly annoyed reaction of the Duke, who refuses to turn and face Ezra. Still, the guy doesn't seem to get the hint and moves closer to the Duke's back, asking for permission. The protagonist, realizing the situation, quietly tells Duke Cesare that he should escort her outside. He quickly starts doing so, but before they leave the banquet, Cesare says that Adelaide did a good job and lets go of her hand, stepping away. Lucrezia, observing the entire situation, asks Ginevra if she has ever, by any chance, seen the Duke make a mistake during a dance. Not understanding the question, Miss Ginevra simply answers that she never has, since he's very talented. But of course, our stalker had already noticed it, saying that he wavered for a moment, and she only noticed it because she loves him so much and is always watching. She then asks her friend why he acted that way, which gives poor Ginevra chills standing next to this unbalanced girl. Ginevra asks Lucrezia to calm down, as sometimes his sister might have said something that caught him by surprise, so the young lady shouldn't put too much meaning into it. Besides, soon Adelaide will become part of Lucrezia's family. That fills Lucrezia's eyes with hope again, remembering that Adelaide will marry her brother. With the last carriages leaving, the butler comments that it took until 4 in the morning for the banquet to finally end, and says that the Duke did an excellent job. Cesare asks what the guests' comments were, and the butler replies that everyone seemed very pleased with the vases they received as gifts. Then, turning to another servant, the Duke asks if he has already prepared everything for the cavalcade, to which the servant proudly answers that everything was arranged with great care, adding that the young lady's debut was perfect, and that now the Duke should take the opportunity to rest. Unable to hold himself, the servant also comments that the Duke should take care of his health, since the social season will begin tomorrow, and as he is the most sought-after young man. But before he can finish the sentence, he immediately gets a blow to the head. Bonaparte simply tells him to take care of the rest and to report anything urgent to him. Finally leaving, before he goes, the servant calls him again to wish him a happy birthday, which the Duke doesn't respond to. But when he turns around, a slight smile can be seen on his face. Remembering the words that the young lady's debut was perfect, the Duke feels satisfied, since that girl who used to clean shoes really did her job well. Over the last 3 months, Adele Vivi had done an excellent job in the role of a young lady, as the secret daughter of the Bonaparte family and his beloved sister. Apparently, she had visited him in his office several times and had started to copy some of his mannerisms in the most natural way possible. She even asked him to buy her some jewelry, just like a real sister would. Every time he bought what she wanted, her face would blush while admiring the jewel. Sometimes the Duke noticed that her expression was so genuine that he got confused, wondering if she was really opening up to him. But then, with the words of the maid who takes care of his sister, saying that she didn't even touch any of the jewelry that was given to her, and didn't seem to show any interest in them, leaving all the arrangement of accessories and dresses to the maid, the Duke laughs, thinking how stubborn that girl is. Because of that, he forced himself to continually torment her, calling her just a girl who cleans shoes, that she is nothing without him, that even though she is nothing, she is still very proud. Normally, most people would get angry hearing all that, but the only thing Adelaide said was that he was too rough. He wonders where that woman who once pointed a pair of scissors at him had gone. It's as if she disappeared after that initiation night at the club, along with her tears. As the Duke lights a cigar, he thinks about how irritating this is. Yet he still doesn't understand why he feels this way. Annoyed, he decides he doesn't need to know why he feels like that, since the plan is already set, and he'll continue with it. At that moment, he ends up finding Adelaide in her nightgown in the middle of the forest. She's standing still, admiring a flower. Without noticing the Duke's presence, she sits on a chair and begins to sing a song, until he interrupts her, calling her name. Nervous, she stands up and ends up hitting the chair against her heel, making it fall to the ground. The Duke approaches, asking if she's all right, but Adelaide can only ask what he's doing there. Helping her up, he says he was just passing by when he found her and wondered what she was doing. Adelaide explains that she was just sitting for a moment after walking. Looking at that chair, the Duke realizes that it must have hurt that piece of wood quite a bit when it hit her heel. But looking at Adelaide, she only has a smile on her face, asking if he shouldn't be resting since he must be very tired. Being sarcastic, he asks if she's worried about him. Still in her role as a sister, Adelaide answers that of course she is, since as his sister, it's only natural for her to care about him. The Duke notices that this act of hers makes her seem completely emotionless. Tired of it, he just sits on the chair while Adelaide asks if she should leave him alone to rest. But he prefers that she stay. Smiling, Adelaide says she'll sit by his side. Smoking his cigar again, the Duke notices that it's been a while since they've been alone together, since she always leaves the room as soon as they finish talking. Probably because she can't stand breathing the same air as him. And probably, as soon as he finishes the cigar, she'll come up with some excuse to leave. Remembering that soon she'll start spending time with Esdra. Bonaparte stares at her while thinking this, but Adelaide just stays quiet, looking at him. At that moment, the Duke wonders what exactly he wants from this shoe-cleaning woman. Finally, breaking the silence, he decides to ask why she hates him, but Adelaide answers with a smile, saying that she likes her brother very much. Annoyed, the Duke just tells her to stop acting and be the shoe cleaner that she is. Feigning innocence, Adelaide only asks, "What do you mean, shoe cleaner?" And the Duke realizes that her acting is so good that anyone would be fooled. Ignoring the act, he asks again why she hates him, but Adelaide won't break character and keeps saying she likes her brother very much. He then asks again if she likes him, to which Adelaide replies that she likes him from the bottom of her heart. Throwing his cigar to the ground, the Duke stands and brings his face close to Adelaide's, asking if she likes him even when he does this, getting closer and closer, as if he were about to kiss her. Adelaide stares at him for a moment, and for a fraction of a second, she shows an irritated look, but quickly returns to character and, placing her hands around his neck, says, "It's quite pleasing." Then she asks if she should call him Cesare. This startles the Duke, making him quickly pull away from Adelaide. Without even looking at him again, she says it's just a pity. Annoyed, the Duke wonders if she really thought he would fall for something like that, showing no expression in his eyes. He then says that she must be very happy to be sold to a noble, just like she always wanted. As if in defense, he keeps offending her, saying there's no difference between being sold to a brothel or to a noble, saying that she can act like she's something important, but her true nature is still the same. That's why she must hide it well when she's near Esdra, since that bastard hypocrite won't look at her twice if he finds out who she really is. He's startled when he looks at her expression, which shows not a hint of anger or irritation despite all his words. Realizing he's gone too far, but still irritated, the Duke just turns his back on her, and as he leaves, says that being near her always ruins his mood. In Fortnite, the social season happens as if it were divided in two each year. The first season goes from spring until the early months of summer, and the second begins at the end of the year, in winter, lasting until around the start of the following year. Thus, every year, Cesare announces the start of the winter social season with a banquet celebrating his birthday. After that, the Bonaparte household usually hosts the cavalcade. Some fireworks start going off, and the guard apologizes to the Duke, saying he didn't expect it to be a problem. The horse panics with Lady Adelaide on top, but the guard can't do anything about the young lady's riding skills. Adelaide feels a bit uneasy because being on a horse is quite high up. And since she was from Gomorrah, she obviously had never ridden a horse before. So she asks the Duke what he thinks about her riding with someone, since the roads can't fit a carriage and she doesn't want to miss the social season. So perhaps it would be better for Mr. Eager to go with her on the horse. Looking slightly annoyed, the Duke just agrees, saying there won't be any problems. On the way, Adelaide comments that she's glad she doesn't have to swim since it's not summer. Eager asks if the young lady never learned how to swim. Adelaide says that actually she does know how and used to swim a lot in rivers. However, the sea scares her a little. The guard comments that there are no sharks on the coast, so she has nothing to worry about. Adelaide laughs at that comment, saying she's not a child. She just doesn't like it because the sea is too noisy. Suddenly, she hears several horses approaching very fast. Many men ride past with the Duke, galloping at high speed. Adelaide asks Aguirre what they're doing, and he answers that they're racing. The young lady clearly notices that the Duke has the advantage over the others, and in the end, he wins. Several women comment on how the Duke won again this year and are impressed by how fast he is. Adelaide also realizes that the rumors she heard about him being very good at sports are actually true. One of the nobles complains that the Duke's horse is much faster, so it's unfair. Bonaparte just laughs and says the man should try to get a horse like his then. Seeing this scene, Adelaide is impressed that Cesare can make jokes and smile with others, until he notices that she's staring at him. He quickly turns away and continues on his way. The protagonist doesn't understand what that was about. After all, she was just looking because it was interesting, and she realizes that he's always very rude and cold when talking to her. Aegir, noticing that the young lady seems a little uncomfortable, asks if she would like to ride like those horsemen, saying that he's confident in his riding skills. Realizing he's trying to comfort her, Adelaide smiles and asks if he's confident enough to beat her brother. Hesitating for a minute, Aegir replies that maybe that's not possible, but as a way to impress her, he makes the horse rise up and then starts galloping. Enjoying that sensation, Adelaide says she'll bet on him in the next race and asks him to make sure her brother drops a few positions, to which Aegir agrees with a smile. As they approach a city, Aegir explains that they're almost there, and that's where the young lady will spend the social season, which Adelaide finds magnificent. Finally, they arrive at the Estalone resort and are welcomed by the Duke and Lady Lucrezia. The two greet each other, and Lucrezia says she's been looking forward to Adelaide's arrival, commenting that there are several walking trails nearby. She and the other ladies were just about to go for a stroll and invite Adelaide to join, saying she already asked her brother for permission. The jealous one can't help himself when he sees the two on the horse together, but he just turns away and tells her to ask a pony for instructions. Meanwhile, Lucrezia asks her to leave the horse there and meet them at St. Lucia Square in half an hour. Epinay says she'll explain everything the young lady needs to know while brushing her hair. The social season began today, and since Adelaide has just debuted, she'll meet several notable figures of high society. Fornate is extremely exclusive, so everyone will be a bit wary of Adelaide, as she was introduced to society later. They are known as those who grew up hearing the bells of the same tower. In other words, a very close-knit group with their own private circle. The mother of Master Bonaparte, Duchess Caterina, was condemned to ostracism simply for being from Orcanina. Adelaide asks if the Duchess wasn't part of the royal family of Orcanina. Apony says that's true, but either way, she was still considered an outsider to them. That's why everyone doubted her talents. Thus, they'll surely test Adelaide to see if she truly shares the Duke's blood. Finishing dressing her up, Apony tells the young lady to do her best and show who she really is, which makes Adelaide feel confident. Later, the young ladies are walking along the beach, commenting on how splendid the day is. One of them, changing the subject, remarks that horseback riding doesn't seem to be Miss Adelaide's strong suit, since they saw her struggling a bit earlier. However, it's a pity the roads in Fornate aren't suitable for carriages. Adelaide realizes they've already started with their teasing and questioning about her lineage. So wisely, she replies that she doesn't get along very well with her horse. However, thanks to that, she says she was able to see how difficult it is for those who don't even have the option to ride. She adds that if she tells this to her brother, he'll implement new policies to improve the roads of Fornate. The young ladies, caught off guard by that answer, just laugh and say that's good news. Then they decide to change the subject, asking about her relationship with her brother. Wouldn't it be strange since they spent so much of their lives apart? But Adelaide was prepared and answers that her brother has always been very kind and generous to her. That's why she never felt uncomfortable around him, saying that probably blood is thicker than water, showing everyone the ring she received from him. One of the young ladies, noticing the ring, comments that it's one that was on display in Biaccio's boutique window. The protagonist, already expecting that reaction, confirms it, saying that the young lady is really very up to date with the latest trends. The young lady then asks if, by any chance, Adelaide also bought the blue diamond that was there 2 weeks ago, but the protagonist only replies that she doesn't remember and would have to check her jewelry box, leaving everyone impressed since she doesn't even remember which jewels she owns. Embarrassed, one of them comments that the young lady must have many fine jewels, and Adelaide says she only wears those that are up to her standards, leaving her speechless. Lucrezia finally decides to interrupt, saying to the young ladies that she's glad they're being so friendly with Adelaide, but they need to let her breathe a little and stop with so many questions. A while later, playing near the water, Lucrezia calls Adelaide, commenting that the lighthouse east of the beach is one of Ador's most famous tourist spots, and she'd love to show it to her. The protagonist, even knowing it's clearly a trap, has no choice but to accept. Lucrezia says she'll show the lighthouse to Adelaide, and the other young ladies say they'll meet up later. After walking through the woods for a while, Lucrezia says that Adelaide really is interesting, especially the way she handled those women's questions. That was truly expected from a member of the Bonaparte house. Adelaide only thanks her, saying it's very kind of her. Lucrezia then asks if they're friends. After all, Adelaide has always rooted for the Duke's love with her, and as thanks, Lucrezia would like to support her adaptation to the new circle, saying she hopes Adelaide enjoys her stay. Someone is in the woods watching the two at the moment Lucrezia says she wishes the young lady well, and then pushes her, running away right after. Annoyed, Adelaide, on the ground, doesn't quite understand what that damn woman wants or is plotting, until finally someone approaches. And when she looks, it's Ezra. He looks clearly irritated and comments that this is truly pointless. Adelaide, not understanding anything, looks at him, but before she can ask anything, Ezra asks if she got hurt. Hesitating after hearing that he really is the most gentlemanly man in society, Adelaide decides to get up by herself. But when she tries, she realizes her ankle is quite injured. Even so, she stands and says he's being extremely rude. After all, he's asking several questions to Lady Bonaparte without even greeting her. Irritated, he says it's not that he's trying to start a conversation, but that he only came because Lucrezia called him. Maintaining her composure, Adelaide says that then he should just wait for Miss Lucrezia and stop being rude to her. Ezra tries to argue, saying he wouldn't ignore an injured person, but then insinuates that maybe it was Adelaide who arranged all this to meet him alone and probably convinced his sister. Realizing how little sense that makes, Adelaide asks why he believes that. Then Ezra replies that it was probably Duke Cesare who brought her there, because he wants to marry her off to him, saying it's very obvious since everyone already knows about the rumors, but he himself doesn't want to marry that way. Adelaide then thinks about what would be the best response, since he seems to be trying to challenge Cesare. So she comments that he seems quite confident, saying that she herself doesn't like arranged marriages and only came to Fornate to spend time with her family, and that it's ridiculous to hear that from someone who thinks he's too good to be with a country girl like her. Embarrassed, Ezra realizes she misunderstood things, but Adelaide continues, saying that she is a Bonaparte, and that there's no one in Fornate worthy of being her match in an arranged marriage. Therefore, he should abandon the idea that she'd need any help to force or arrange one. Finally, it seems he understands the situation and asks if she's not going to marry him then. Adelaide replies with another question, if by any chance she has the power to decide that, since their families have a sacred promise, and because of that, they live in a glory built by their ancestors and cannot burden future generations with such irrational vows. Embarrassed, Ezra apologizes, saying he really thought she was considering an arranged marriage, and the protagonist explains that she even understands the situation and how he could have misunderstood, but judging her like that based only on gossip is shameful. Again, Ezra apologizes, saying it truly was a mistake, and asks if she would give him the honor of greeting her. Adelaide then introduces herself politely, and Ezra does the same, asking to escort her back to the resort. For someone who thought it would be a normal walk with conversation, no, he's already carrying her in his arms. Adelaide comments that she's probably taking too much advantage of his kindness, but Ezra says it's an honor to help her, and shows a splendid view of the city, saying the city itself is magnificent. He mentions that in the city there's a saying, live with desire. Adelaide repeats the saying, if one morning I woke up in the heart of a door, all desires would awaken at once and envelop me completely, which makes Ezra very happy that she knows Calvino. Adelaide even jokes that his happiness shows how much he loves literature, thinking that all those visits to the library were really worth it. Ezra asks if she has any plans for the social season, which Adelaide denies, so he invites her to join his reading club, and the two continue talking about it while Cesare watches them from afar, clearly jealous, which is usual for our toxic protagonist. Without saying anything or getting closer to them, Cesare just lights his cigar and walks toward the mansion. A while later, the lovebirds approach, and finally the Duke says something, commenting that it seems the two are getting along very well. Ezra explains that he was only helping Miss Adelaide and that his brother shouldn't take it the wrong way, which the protagonist confirms, saying she felt dizzy and ended up tripping. Just laughing, the Duke comments that he thanks Ezra and also that Adelaide must be heavy. Annoyed, Ezra replies that what he just said is absurd, that his sister got hurt, and the only thing the Duke has to say is that she's heavy? but the Duke retorts that she seems fine from his point of view, which makes the other even angrier, saying she's only fine because he was there to help her. To make things worse, at the very moment he should have stayed quiet, the Duke says congratulations to Ezra, adding that with that strength, he'll surely have enough to last the whole night, leaving the poor guy completely embarrassed and irritated. With good reason, right? Then he asks why the Duke always behaves that way, always insulting others. Pretending not to care, the Duke asks if Ezra by any chance is interested in him, since he knows him so well, which only makes things worse, leaving Ezra even more furious, even saying he despises the Duke. Adelaide is just watching everything silently, until finally the Duke says it's truly pleasant talking to him, but maybe he should take care of his sister at that exact moment. Ezra then remembers he's been carrying Adelaide in his arms all this time and apologizes, saying her injury should be the priority. The protagonist thanks him for bringing her there, and also comments that their conversation was very pleasant. Ezra is happy and says he looks forward to seeing her again and continuing their talk. The situation makes the Duke even more irritated, and he comments that he can't stand seeing that guy flirting with his sister. Sometime later, in the office, the doctor is already examining Adelaide's ankle while the Duke is smoking one cigar after another, filling the room with smoke. It seems he finally realizes it and puts out the cigar, asking the doctor if her injury is serious. The doctor says it's not serious, but even so, she'll need some help for a while and that he'll give the instructions to a pony properly. The tense moment comes when the two are finally alone, and the Duke asks Adelaide to explain herself. She then tells him about the walk with Miss Lucretia and everything that happened, finishing by saying she believes Lord Ezra is starting to show some interest in her. It's hard to tell whether the Duke is happy that the plan is working or irritated because he's jealous, but he only says she did well. He seems annoyed when he comments that Ezra invited her to the book club, and in fact, the Duke was thinking of taking her to the O'Hara Club. However, since she already received an invitation from Ezra, she can choose. After thinking for a while, Adelaide is about to say that she'll do whatever the Duke orders, but she stops mid-sentence, wondering if maybe this is some kind of test he's giving her, and instead replies with a question, whether it might be better to accept Ezra's invitation. The Duke asks why, and she says it's precisely because the goal is for her to marry him, and since the target is right in front of her, the best option would be not to back down. The Duke then tells her to go ahead, and Adelaide wonders if she made the right choice. He comments that Ezra will come to pick her up tomorrow, so she should be ready. When the protagonist asks if he'll really show up tomorrow, the Duke asks if she hadn't mentioned that she enjoyed their conversation, which Adelaide agrees with. And again, with his problem of not saying what he truly feels, Cesare says that Ezra is as much of an idiot as a shoeshine boy, so of course the two would get along well, telling her to leave. The next day, the little puppy comes all happy to see Miss Adelaide and even apologizes for showing up unannounced, saying it would be nice if she joined the club. Adelaide then replies that there's no need to apologize since she was also interested in joining. Hearing that, Ezra says that actually, the club was just an excuse, and he came because he was worried about Adelaide. The protagonist is surprised, as she didn't know Lord Ezra could be so straightforward. A bit shy, he even says he dressed up for the occasion, which makes the protagonist laugh at the situation. The guard Egger appears, saying that he'll accompany the young lady during the social event since she now needs someone to help her walk. The look Ezra gives Aegir is a bit strange. There's probably some story between them we don't know yet. He just turns his face away and says he understands. And so they go on horseback. Ezra in front and Adelaide and Aegir behind. Ezra asks if Adelaide is treated well by Duke Bonaparte, to which she agrees, saying her brother is very kind, that sometimes he can even be a bit too direct, but he's friendly and quite shy, which makes Ezra a little suspicious. Shy? How? But Adelaide knows how to handle the situation and asks if it's because they don't seem close, which makes Ezra back down, saying he was just worried, but she makes a point of saying that just yesterday, when the doctor was treating her ankle, he was extremely concerned about her. And when she says that, Ezra is shocked to learn that she was treated in the Duke's room, which leaves the protagonist confused, wondering if she said something wrong. Then she remembers Lucretia's words, questioning how an unmarried woman had cared for the Duke in his room, alone. Maybe Ezra thought the same thing, but she prefers not to go deeper into the subject, and he, realizing she's uncomfortable, asks her to forget what he said, and that if she needs any help, she can ask. When they arrive at the place, Adelaide comments that she's never attended social events, so she feels a bit lost. And of course, Ezra encourages her, saying she'll be fine. As soon as they arrive, the place is quite lively, and everyone looks at them, commenting that Miss Adelaide Bonaparte has arrived, and some even ask if Ezra is her escort. However, as he gets a bit closer, Ginevra spots Adelaide and becomes super excited. The protagonist then says she'll greet someone she knows, stepping away from Ezra for a moment. She greets Ginevra, who gets very excited that Adelaide remembers her, and to make the girl even happier, the protagonist says they became friends that day, asking if she could join her at her table. Of course, she accepts and even invites Ezra to sit with them. During the club meeting, people talk a lot about various aspects of literature, and Adelaide just observes all the conversation, realizing they're going much deeper into literature than she imagined. and it definitely helps her learn more than just visiting the library. Even so, the environment is full of people who are true experts on the subject, like professors, poets, and scholars. And she knows that if she says even the slightest wrong thing, she doesn't even want to imagine what their reaction would be. One of the men asks the protagonist who her favorite author is, since at her debutante ball, she seemed very interested in Boccaccio. With all class, Adelaide replies that, yes, that's right. Besides Petrarch, since one can't talk about Centenary literature without mentioning them. And she also gives her suitor a little push, saying she also really likes Calvino, just like Lord Esdra. Smiling, he's happy to know that she has tastes similar to his. At that moment, he starts talking nonstop about his favorite author, which makes Adelaide feel relieved, as she believes he's doing it to take the focus off her, so she doesn't feel so overwhelmed. They talk about several topics for a while, and Adelaide feels happy because she never imagined she'd be in a place like that discussing literature, especially with nobles, whom she always thought were just arrogant. But everyone is very respectful and kind. One of the women at another table speaks loudly, saying it's truly a tragedy, referring to Gomorrah as a place that always causes problems, and mentions there was another commotion there. Another man at the other table agrees with the lady, saying that place really is so dangerous that even commoners avoid it. Then the woman refers to Adelaide, asking if Duke Bonaparte has any plans to demolish that place, since it seems ridiculous that there's an area full of crime in a city like Fornate. The nobles around all start agreeing, saying that if Gomorrah ceased to exist, it would be a great place to build a garden. In addition to reforming social policies, removing all the support from the nobles' taxes and letting the population there become self-sufficient, maybe even teach them to work harder. One of the men insinuates, asking if Miss Adelaide doesn't agree with these assumptions. Knowing the protagonist's background, of course she would be irritated by that. After all, these people have no idea what it's like to go hungry and are full of ignorance. Even without Adelaide responding, the woman continues, saying that it would be very difficult to eradicate an entire population. Maybe it would even be better to sell those people from Gomorrah as slaves. That way, it would be easier to get rid of them. With that, everyone in the room starts laughing, while Adelaide just drinks her wine in silence. The woman, noticing the lack of reaction, asks if the protagonist thinks this topic isn't important for Fornate, which she obviously denies, and even throws a jab at the woman, asking if she would have the courage to repeat that opinion out on the street. Annoyed, the woman asks if, as a member of the Bonaparte family, the young lady knows about Omerta. And Adelaide replies that what they were talking about has nothing to do with the Code of Silence, meaning to say that in a republic like Centenary, would it be considered moral to sell citizens as slaves? The woman raises her voice and begins shouting, asking if innocent citizens like them should just tolerate those barbarians who know nothing but crime. And Adelaide adds that she's not referring to the people who broke the law, but rather that Gomorrah isn't just a monolith. And she's certain there are people there who also want to escape that place. People who probably tried everything they could and, even with all their efforts, weren't able to get out of Gomorrah. That's why you can't blame everything on the individual, but rather the society that has to solve this problem together. It seems the woman won't give up because she keeps poking, saying that Adelaide is probably not aware, since she came from Capolo. But those bastards didn't put in any effort as far as she knows. And she even points out that one only has to look at Viscount Segoli. He was able to start his own company with nothing more than 50,000 gold coins that his family provided. Giving another example, she points to Miss Audrey, saying that after decades of research, she made progress in navigation methods, creating an incredible invention. And what have those beggars done? Nobles like them use their short time to study. And maybe if those poor people had used their time to work hard, Gomorrah would probably be empty by now. Adelaide asks, and what about those people who didn't have 50,000 gold coins? Or those who didn't even have any money to buy a piece of bread that day? The people who have no family to support decades of research for one person? Or even the people who have no home, no food, or even clothes to wear? The woman tries to interrupt, but Adelaide doesn't stop, saying that in Gomorrah there are people who work all day just to be able to pay the rent of a small room and have somewhere to sleep at night. That's why it's not right to belittle other people's efforts based solely on your narrow understanding of the world, madam. That made everyone go quiet. And the woman, realizing there was no way to win, decided to change the subject, saying they wouldn't reach any conclusion anyway. Maybe those people just should have been born into better families. Adelaide becomes completely furious with that woman. With good reason, right? No sense at all. But Esdra, noticing her irritation, holds Adelaide's hand, saying he's sorry for interrupting the discussion, but that they need to leave and that he really needs Miss Adelaide's company. A while later on the balcony, Esdra offers Adelaide some water, saying she looks a bit pale, and she asks why he helped her. Esdra replies that she simply looked like someone who needed help. The protagonist realizes she probably wasn't able to hide her feelings 100%. And even now that she's finally managed to put her past behind her, there are still some things that affect her. Adelaide asks Esdra if he agrees with what the other nobles were saying. He replies that he would be devastated if that were the impression she had of him, which makes Adelaide happy. But before she can respond, he puts his hand on her face and says she looks like she's about to cry. There's that tension between the two. Until Igor appears, looking for the young lady, saying it's time for them to return. Back in the club room, the crazy woman is still freaking out, saying that the goddess of the ocean must be blind, since everyone heard the same thing she did. How Miss Adelaide made her seem like a horrible person who dismisses any human rights, when she was merely making a comment any noble would find impressive. But Adelaide apparently has no sense of humor. Another noble comments that perhaps it's a topic that invites differing opinions, and the other woman adds that since she's a Bonaparte, she probably has a better view of how to control the lower classes than they do. A young lady who had been silent until now finally speaks up, saying that Adelaide seems to have a peculiar side no one had noticed. When the others ask why she says that, the young lady explains with an example, saying it's like two knights who have challenged each other to a duel to protect their honor. Then she asks Lord Bruno what he thinks about that situation. The man replies that a duel between two nobles wouldn't make sense, because no one would take part in such a barbaric tradition. The woman says that's exactly the point. In high society, there truly is a tradition where nobles duel for a young lady's honor. However, that's no longer commonly practiced, and this kind of custom is only seen in books, implying that Adelaide, since she entered high society later, has no understanding of its customs and only knows what she's read in books. And one of the nobles, understanding her meaning, asked the young lady what she thinks Miss Adelaide would say about the hypothetical situation she described, and the girl answers that she would probably root for the noble who was fighting for her. That leaves everyone irritated, because even though she was born in the countryside, how could she be so naive? The crazy woman, seeing the opportunity, says that blood really is important, but the environment where someone is born and raised is crucial. That's why Adelaide's past is questionable, and she says she refuses to believe Adelaide is truly a noble of Fornate. Ginevra, hearing this, finds it absurd that this woman is questioning the authority of the Bonaparte family, but the woman doesn't stop and even says that the ideal thing would be to confirm whether or not she's truly a young lady worthy of bearing the Bonaparte name, and invites everyone to go to the Noble Hall to verify that in the future. Licentia Club is a place where the nobles of Fernate go to find a partner for the night. And again, the place was lively until some nobles spotted Duke Bonaparte, asking why he went there instead of the O'Hara Club. He then remembers the conversation he had with Adelaide earlier when she said Esdra was starting to show interest in her, and that he had invited her to the O'Hara Club. But in the end, she said the goal was for her to marry Esdra, so she would accept his invitation. The Duke believes that was the best choice, or at least tries to convince himself it was. And according to him, he's only irritated because she seems to have fallen for Esdra too quickly, even without knowing anything about men, and is probably enjoying herself now at the literature club. Finally, he decides to answer the nobles by saying, why else would he be there, if not because he's hungry? Excited, the nobles comment that it's understandable, and they even thought it strange that the Duke had gone so long without a woman. Kyle remembers that he practically forced himself to do nothing in order to take care of Adelaide, and convincing himself that now she'll focus 100% on Esdra, he should make use of his time. A woman approaches, saying that the Duke is drinking a bit too much, and also mentioning that it's been a while since she last saw him. This is Carlotta, the youngest daughter of the Duke of Ivrea. Seeing that the Duke doesn't respond, Carlotta gets closer, and noticing the redness in his face, asks if he's drunk, saying he should get some rest and gives him a kiss on the cheek. Automatically, he turns his face away and wonders why he's turning away, since he came there precisely for that, and maybe if he eases the situation a little, he won't overreact so much with Adelaide anymore. So he accepts Carlotta's invitation, and the two go to the bedroom. The girl is all in, saying that no one is better than him at this, but the Duke doesn't seem very interested. She then asks why he's so unenthusiastic. Regardless, she pushes him onto the bed and says she'll have to take the initiative tonight. He doesn't know if it's because of the alcohol or if it's his mind playing tricks on him, but looking at Carlotta, he can only see Adelaide. Carlotta even gets excited because it seems like he's finally showing some kind of reaction, and she gets closer to him. But our love-struck Duke is just imagining Adele Vivi, thinking that he knew this would happen. He knew she would want him. Poor Carlotta has no idea what's going through his head and feels happy that he smiled, saying she should get him drunk more often. She keeps getting closer to him, and at the moment she calls his name, the Duke remembers the moment he had with Adelaide in the garden, when she asked if she could call him Cesare, and that's when he realizes it's not Adele, it's Carlotta. He quickly pushes her off of him. The girl, understandably, doesn't get what's going on. It seemed like he was into it, and suddenly he's not anymore. Realizing how completely insane he's acting, the Duke laughs and says he needs to go. Carlotta starts shouting, asking if he's lost his mind, why he's leaving halfway through, but he simply ignores her and leaves her there yelling. He walks toward the mansion where the butler is shocked to see him show up in the middle of the night, especially with his clothes all disheveled and still smelling of alcohol. The butler says he'll fetch some coffee and asks him to wait in the garden to get some fresh air. While he questions his own sanity, the cause of all his troubles appears, calling for her brother, and as soon as she sees the marks on his body, he quickly covers himself and says it's not what she's thinking, to which the protagonist simply replies that it's fine. Obviously, this irritates the Duke, since she could at least pretend to believe him. Adelaide says she shouldn't interfere in his private life and adds that she must be making him uncomfortable, so she'll leave. But when he sees the cane she's using to walk, he tells her they should sit down for a moment, and as soon as the butler returns, he'll ask him to help Adele back to the mansion. There's silence for a while until finally the Duke asks why she went out in the middle of the night if her ankle is still healing. Besides, she doesn't seem well either. Adelaide is surprised because it always feels like the Duke can see through her mask, or maybe she just hasn't been able to control her emotions since that afternoon at the literature club. The Duke asks if it's a problem with Ezra, but she says no, since he helped her. Then the Duke asks what happened, for her to tell him. And finally, the protagonist says that the subject of Gamora came up in a conversation. The nobles talked about the revolts that have been happening recently, and she remembers all the insults she heard from them about Gamora's population, and how malicious they were, even suggesting turning all those people into slaves. But she only says that what they said upset her, so she couldn't hide it and ended up responding to the nobles more harshly. The Duke stays silent for a minute and then asks if that's all, which Adelaide confirms. As a terrible advisor, he asks why she can't forget her past. Oh, come on, we can't with him. We try to give him some credit, but it's hard. He still says it doesn't make sense for her to cling to bad memories from the past, since now she's part of the Bonaparte family. The protagonist feels a bit confused by his words. Even though she knows he's not trying to criticize her and maybe is even trying to comfort her, she comes to the conclusion that she should tell him to drink more often. But in the end, she just asks if she can say something since they're on the topic, saying that her second favorite thing about being a Bonaparte is the clothes she wears underneath her dress, that they match one another, fit her body perfectly, have no holes or patches, and that she's never in her life worn anything so beautiful. She remembers that when she was poor, the parts people didn't see were the first ones they ignored, and that's why she never forgets how worn out, loose, and patched her underclothes were. Because every morning when Epony helps her get dressed and she looks at herself in the mirror, she always remembers how she used to look. Even now, when she wears a dress worth more than 3,000 gold coins or says things she learned from books, a simple joke from a noblewoman quickly brings her back to Gamora, and that makes her question how she'll ever manage to become a perfect daughter of the Bonaparte family. And it makes her think that maybe the Duke's plan is much harder to achieve than she imagined. Seeing that Adelaide is still upset, the Duke says he might ask Egger to tell him exactly what happened, which the protagonist agrees to. Then he asks if Ezra helped her. Thinking carefully about what to say, Adelaide decides not to tell him all the details about her and Ezra, and simply answers that yes, he helped her. The Duke tells her not to open her heart 100% to Ezra, and Adelaide assures him that someone who is drowning doesn't have the luxury of choosing to do that, just like she did when she took the Duke's hand that day he made his offer. The next morning, Adelaide apologizes for having called Ginevra so suddenly, saying that maybe it would have been more appropriate if she had planned it beforehand. But Miss Ginevra says it's fine, since she was very happy to be invited. However, as Ginevra looks at Adelaide, she can't stop thinking about what those nobles had said earlier, that Adelaide didn't seem like a noble. After all high-ranking nobles always expect others to adapt to their schedule, not the other way around. She wonders that even if Adelaide had lived in the countryside, if she hadn't lived as a commoner, she should know these things. Adelaide interrupts Ginevra's thoughts by calling her to follow her. Together, they arrive at the guest reception room for honored visitors at the resort. Ginevra is completely impressed because the place seems even bigger than the Duval mansion. Adelaide says she made sure they wouldn't be interrupted today, so Ginevra could feel comfortable. Ringing a small bell, Adelaide asks for the meal to be served, and several attendants enter carrying a huge banquet and many dishes. The butler asks if Ginevra would like something to drink, and while he serves her, she comments that she feels very special. Adelaide tells her she can visit anytime she wants, saying that the cook at the Bonaparte mansion is very talented, which leaves Ginevra shocked, since she never imagined she'd be invited to the Bonaparte mansion, and of course she agrees, all excited. Noticing Adelaide's injured ankle, Ginevra asks if that wound was Lucrezia's fault, and seeing that Adelaide doesn't respond, she apologizes if she asked something uncomfortable, saying she only asked because it's the kind of thing Lucrezia would probably do. Adelaide asks if Ginevra isn't friends with Lucrezia, and she answers that she thought she was, until someone told her she was a canary and not a cuckoo. Adelaide then comments that Miss Lucrezia is probably very eager to make her brother and her grow closer, but Ginevra isn't falling for that talk and says that's probably not all she wants, since her main goal is to swap companions during the social season. Adelaide asks if Lucrezia would really be bad enough to hurt someone just because of that, but Ginevra says it's not just that. It's also a warning from Lucrezia, saying she could hurt Adelaide at any moment if she happened to get in the way of her plans. And even if it sounds absurd or hard to believe, Ginevra knows that Lucrezia's obsession is crazier than anyone can imagine, since she herself knows it's been happening for many years. And she remembers an event from 10 years ago, when Lucrezia was only 8 years old, when she saw Lord Cesare in the garden. And the first thing Lucrezia did upon meeting him was to run, pick a flower, and ask if he would like to marry her. But at that time, the Duke's answer was that he didn't need anyone who wasn't useful to the Bonaparte house, leaving little Lucrezia disappointed and alone there in the garden. That makes Adelaide question what kind of logic the nobility has. Only being able to be with someone who is useful? Ginevra continues saying that this is how their story began. And since that day, Lucrezia began studying everything she could about a region called Soruk. It even seemed like she knew that one day the Estalone company would reach Soruk. And so, she never stopped studying and ended up being one of the best in college because of it. Other scholars also praised her for her knowledge of the art and culture of Soruk. Even the Duke ended up having to ask for her help for the sake of the Estalone company. And that's why he couldn't completely reject Lucrezia, even though she's quite annoying. The protagonist realizes that Lucrezia made the Duke dependent on her through her sheer willpower and hard work. And because of that story, Adelaide's plan to keep her enemy close might have been wrong. Ginevra continues saying there's one more thing Adelaide needs to know about Lucrezia. She'll probably soon receive an invitation to the Salon Genoble, since that woman from the literature club who argued with Adelaide still seems upset about the situation and is probably plotting to humiliate Adelaide in public. Knowing this, the protagonist asks if Ginevra can tell her more about the Duchess of Genoble, what she likes, what her hobbies are, things like that. Ginevra explains that the Duchess really likes betting, especially making wagers with interesting prizes, and that she owns and manages a casino. While the two discuss the situation, elsewhere, the Duchess herself is talking with Lucrezia, asking if she has any requests to make. A few days ago, Lucrezia found out that Duke Bonaparte and Carlotta Ivrea were seen going into a room, but what was strange was that he left the room shortly afterward. She asks where he went after that, and the guard answers that he went back to his resort, which makes Lucrezia intrigued. He left Carlotta alone and returned to the resort by himself. But why? Then she starts wondering if it could be the suspicion she's always had, that he went back because of Adelaide, because she was waiting for him at the resort, wondering if he's fallen in love with that wretched woman. And that's why she decided to meet with the Duchess of Genoble. During the conversation, the Duchess explains that Miss Ravenna also mentioned something like that, wanting Miss Adelaide to be invited to the noble salon. But apparently, Lucrezia also has an interest in Miss Adelaide, asking what she'd like to happen. Pretending to be innocent, Lucrezia says she doesn't have the power to decide something like that. And the Duchess, who isn't slow or stupid, asks if she should lend Lucrezia a hand, saying she enjoys teaching young, beautiful noblewomen a lesson, but obviously won't help her without a reason. Lucrezia, already knowing that was the plan, pulls an envelope from her pocket, saying she wouldn't come empty-handed and brought a gift she knows will please the Duchess. She says she knows some craftsmen from Soruk who are living and hiding in Satanari, and that she'll introduce them to the Duchess, which makes the Duchess very excited, since contacting these people is practically impossible, even when you try offering a lot of money, because of the monopoly the Bonapartes have. She had even planned to ignore Lucrezia's request, but with this gift, there's no way she can. Lucrezia says she promises, in the name of the sea goddess, that she'll keep her word, and so they seal the deal. Sometime later, at the event, everyone is shocked when Carlotta slaps Duke Bonaparte right across the face, asking what that was about a few days ago. People start wondering what exactly happened and whether the two are arguing again like in the old days. Still angry, Carlotta says loud enough for everyone to hear that the Duke ran away before they could do anything, and now he has the nerve to show up at the same party as her. At that moment, Adelaide realizes that it was probably this woman the Duke had been with the other night. Annoyed, the Duke wipes his face and says that he simply wasn't attracted to that dull face of hers. And he even asks if that's really his fault. Carlotta becomes even more irritated and embarrassed, obviously, because he's saying that in front of everyone, telling him that if he's going to stoop that low, he should at least be respectful. She also says he's not the only rich man in the region. In the middle of the argument, Adelaide notices a door opening. It's Ezra, confused, wanting to know what's going on. And at that moment, he comes face to face with Adelaide. Even so, Carlotta yells that she would very much like an apology. The Duke, realizing there's nothing else he can do, asks what exactly she wants. Strangely, what she suggests is that he play with her. The four of them sit at the table to play some kind of card game, and Ezra even teases him, saying the Duke has quite the swelling on his cheek. Obviously, Cesare doesn't let that go and says it's a medal of honor for a man who already has everything. Carlotta snaps back, saying he should let her slap his other cheek then, to which the Duke replies, "Wasn't one slap he didn't even deserve already enough?" And the three keep throwing insults and snide remarks at each other during the game while Adelaide is trying to understand the situation and why Carlotta wants to play poker as an excuse for the Duke. Everyone starts making high bets, and Adelaide sees the stakes are too high and decides to leave. As soon as the Duke shows his hand, Adelaide notices he had a great hand and might win this one. But to her surprise, Ezra had better cards. And Carlotta seems happy about it. Apparently, every time the Duke has something, Ezra has something even better. And it goes on for several rounds. He even jokes that maybe the goddess is smiling upon him today, which makes Cesare angry, saying that Ezra is probably cheating. After all, how could he win every round? Adelaide wonders if maybe Cesare is just bad at poker, and as if reading her mind, the dealer says that actually the Duke has terrible luck, not only with cards, but with anything involving gambling, drawing lots, or dice. He always loses when it's something related to luck. Noticing that Carlota is having a great time watching him lose, the Duke comments that it seems she's no longer upset, and she says that since she saw him being humiliated by Ezra, maybe now she'll let that situation go. After all those games when night falls, the Duke lights a cigar on the terrace with Adelaide, commenting that he thought he was going to die of boredom. The protagonist asks if he was just pretending to be upset about losing the rounds, which he agrees, saying he did that because people like it. The Duke thanks her and also tells her not to tell anyone he was only pretending, which leaves Adelaide impressed to see this side of the Duke she didn't know. Even so, she insists, saying she's sure he got irritated with Ezra, and the Duke replies that she should keep that a secret too, realizing that his sister is truly annoying for never letting anything go, and the two laugh together on the terrace. Adelaide starts wondering why, for the first time, she actually enjoyed talking with the Duke. She wonders if it was because of their last conversation, when he tried to comfort her that day. Then she asks if he received the report from Mr. Eager that day, which the Duke says he did, and Adelaide asks why he didn't scold her for not acting like a noble. Cesare explains that he didn't scold her because, in the past, he also thought like those other nobles, believing that commoners live that way only because they're lazy and don't work, and that they could reach the top if only they tried hard enough. But that changed after all. Even the most determined woman from Gomorrah needed his help to get out of there. She probably couldn't have done it on her own. That's why he came to the conclusion that this isn't the Fornate he wants. And that's where we'll stop for now, everyone. If you like the continuation of this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. I tried to adapt for you guys the old videos that were already here on the channel and make this continuation. But if you really like this story, watch it a lot, share it with your friends, because if it gets a lot of views, it means you want part 2. And then I'll definitely bring it. This work is called High Society. I went up to chapter 50, and there are a few more chapters, even though it's not finished yet. I'd also like to know what you think about the relationship between the Duke and Adelaide. I know a lot of people prefer a less toxic male lead. I agree in some parts, but I'll be honest, my heart beats a little faster for the Duke. Even though I think he still has a lot to learn, it seems like he's trying. Are you rooting for this couple, or do you prefer Ezra? Tell me here in the comments. I love hearing your opinions about the stories. Kisses, and I'll see you in the next one.